Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei was betrayed and got trained by Winston and becomes John Wick Part 2. Before we start, please go support the Soul Reaper 301 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Issei is a male in this story. Chapter 5. Excommunicated Part 1. Authors Pav. We can see how night came to the city of Tokyo along with a somewhat heavy rain. In one of the streets of this city, John was running being soaked because of the rain, dodging the people who got in his way, while he was followed by his dog, who was just as soaked as him. The killer knew very well that while he was running, the contract on his excommunication was being carried out. After a while, John stopped for a moment to look at his watch, realizing that he still had time, although out of nowhere his pet began to bark, catching his attention. Making him look around and seeing how 4 men were heading towards where he was, so without wasting time John decided to keep running with in mind to make them lose, being followed by his dog and those guys. On the Continental. Right now we'll focus on Winston and Charon, who recently entered the mainland along with the faction leaders and their companions. But the latter didn't seem to be very happy, let's say, since some were upset by what Winston did to Issei, while the others, even though they didn't like it in part, agreed with the manager. Charon. I hope young Wick can manage to stay safe, he said with some hope as he continued on his way. Winston. He knew the rules very well and he broke them. He killed a man inside the Charon Hotel, he said with a somewhat serious tone, while the supernatural beings listened attentively to their conversation. Charon. How many chances will he have to escape and stay alive? He said, asked with a curious tone, since he didn't know what John was capable of doing now that the rules of the high table didn't limit him. Winston. Well, considering that all the killers in the city and other countries will want a reward of 20 million, and doubting that anyone will try to become their ally. Well, I think it's 50-50, he said with a confident tone, having taken by surprise and impressed the supernatural beings who deigned to speak, however. Asia-chan, exclaimed a man of about 50 or more years old, dressed elegantly, approaching the former nun, along with a woman of a similar age to the man, but she was wearing somewhat simple clothes. Asia. Otu-san, Aka-san, she said with a surprised tone, seeing her ex-fiancé's parents on the mainland, because she contacted them and told them everything about Issei, in addition to having given them the address of the hotel yesterday, but she didn't expect them to come. Izumi. Where is Issei? He said, asked with a worried tone, once he was close to the blonde, although she only lowered her head. Asia. Aka-san, I-san, as she didn't finish speaking because Winston approached and interrupted her. Winston. Nice to meet you, my name is Winston, and I am the manager of this hotel, he said with a somewhat friendly tone, extending his hand and being shaken by Goru and Izumi. Goru. The pleasure is ours, this is my wife Izumi, and I am Goru Hyodou, he said with a somewhat respectful tone, introducing himself to Winston and intending to take his wife's hand, but for some reason she prevented him from doing that. Izumi. Do you know where my son is? She said, asked with a serious and somewhat demanding tone towards the manager, not making a good impression on the aforementioned. Winston. Let's talk in a more private place, shall we? He said, asked, starting to walk, being followed by Charon and the supernatural beings as well as the hyodou. Back with John. Now we will go with a brown-haired boy and his pet who were entering an alley, having managed to lose the subjects who were chasing him, but he checked his watch, seeing that he also lost valuable time trying to lose those assassins. However, he felt something in the pockets of his pants, choosing to check what it was, taking out a gold coin, something that would be of help to him for the moment, and in the other pocket his wallet, not knowing why he still had it. But out of nowhere, a man's voice saying nonsense caught John's attention, and he looked at the man, realizing that he was just a homeless man who a few seconds later noticed John's presence, pulling back the sleeve of his left arm, revealing a pure gold watch. Tick-tock, Mr. Wick, tick-tock, tick-tock, he said mockingly and warning the brown-haired boy, making him leave from there. You don't have much time left, Mr. Wick, he exclaimed in a mocking and funny tone, which John could hear. By the time the killer came out of the alley, he looked around trying to see if anyone was chasing him, noting that he was safe for now, although luckily for him he managed to see a taxi parked across the street. So as not to waste any more time, he picked up his dog in his arms and quickly started crossing the street, causing cars to honk, while others yelled at him, "Hey idiot, be more careful when crossing, will you?" or similar things. Although that mattered very little to John, and he just continued on his way until he had reached the sidewalk safely, hurrying to go to the taxi, but a woman of about 60 years old was going to get into the car, making the brown-haired man speed up his pace, having arrived in time to prevent that woman from getting into the car. Woman. Hey, what's wrong with you? She exclaimed, asked in an annoyed and indignant tone, looking at John, who just put his pet in the taxi. John. Excuse me, miss, but I need a taxi, he said in a slightly embarrassed tone, remembering his wallet and quickly taking it out of his pocket and giving it to the woman. John. Here, you can keep all the money we have, he said, getting into the taxi and closing the door, leaving the woman bewildered by what had happened. John. To the public library, he said with a somewhat serious tone, towards the driver who only nodded and began to drive. While the driver was driving, John was petting his pet, however after a few seconds the taxi suddenly stopped, confusing the brown-haired boy who only looked at the front window of the car, seeing that there was a huge traffic, which bothered him a lot. John. Change of plans, he said in a serious tone, drawing the driver's attention, watching as John took out a gold coin and showed it to him. John. Can you take the puppy to the mainland and give her to the janitor? He said, asked in a serious tone, knowing that the dog would be in too much danger if she continued with him and that she would be better off in Sharon's care. Driver. Of course Mr. Wick, he said in a firm tone, willing to fulfill John's request by receiving the coin. John. Good girl, you are really very good, he said in a somewhat affectionate tone, caressing his pet who remained calm. Without wasting any time, John got out of the taxi and quickly went to the sidewalk and started running towards the library, but in the middle of his way he slowed down a bit to look at his watch, seeing that he had several more minutes until his excommunication would activate, so he decided to speed up his pace. On the Continental. After arriving at the hotel's rooftop and explaining to Goro and Izumi about the criminal world in which Issei currently belongs and works, leaving the hyodou more than incredulous upon learning that their son was turned into an assassin under Winston's command and orders. Izumi. It's not true, please Asia, tell me it's not true, she said in a distressed tone, not believing everything Winston had just told her a few seconds ago. Asia. It's true, she said with a sad tone, not having the courage to look at the brunette's face, causing her to clench her fists tightly. Inside Izumi many emotions were going through, such as guilt, regret and sadness, because some time ago those same emotions had been chasing her, forcing her to hide in her luxuries and comforts, but despite having that and a lot of other privileges, she felt empty. Rias. Kas and we, she didn't finish speaking, as suddenly Izumi slapped the reed very hard, which took everyone present by surprise. Izumi. I don't want to hear your voice ever again, is that clear? He said, asked in an angry tone, looking with hatred at Rias who was about to say something, but. Izumi. What did I tell you? Don't ever talk to me stupid again, and that goes for you all too, she said in an angry tone, also looking at her son's ex-partners, including Asia. Izumi. I hate you, I hate you, I hate all of you, I curse myself for accepting your stupid contract, she exclaimed furiously, towards all the supernatural beings until Goro grabbed her hand. Goro. Honey, calm down please, he didn't finish speaking, because Izumi abruptly got out of his hold and slapped him. Izumi. You are the least indicated to say that to me or call me that way, Goro. Why don't you go say that to Grafia, Venelana or any of those bucking demons you rolled around with behind my back? He said, asked in an angry tone, looking with contempt at a surprised Goro. Izumi. Taking off the ring here, you can shove that ring up your ass or propose to the first hit you see. I don't care if you do it from now on, but never speak to me, understood? He said, asked with a serious and threatening tone, throwing the ring to Goro. Jaren. I didn't think this was going to happen, he said in a surprised tone, by what had happened, being one more expectant along with Winston. Winston. To be honest, I didn't think this would happen either. Really, regret and remorse can cause serious problems, he said in a somewhat surprised tone, noticing how Izumi showed a lot of guilt while Goro showed nothing, although the brunette proceeded to approach Winston angrily. Izumi. And you, Mr. Winston, are the worst of all, she said in an angry tone, not planning to ever forgive the man who turned Issei into a murderer. Winston. What did I do? We just met a few minutes ago, Miss Izumi, he said, asked in a confused and slightly indignant tone, while the aforementioned woman looked at him seriously. Izumi. You will pay for turning my son into a murderer, she said in a threatening tone. Winston did not like the tone the brunette used at all, but he just shook his head calmly. Winston. Actually, Miss Izumi. Jonathan asked me of his own free will to help him become one, he did it to forget what he once was, he said with a somewhat serious tone, knowing very well that supernatural beings were one of the reasons why John failed more than once to kill Santino. Izumi. I want proof, I need you to show me if they really turned my son into the murderer they say he is, she said in a serious tone, while Charon chose to return to his post. Winston. Leaders, could you give us a hand with that? He said, asked, to which the aforementioned formed several holograms searching for John throughout the city, having located him after a few minutes. With John. We see how the murderer was already near the public library, quickly entering the building and going to the reception. Once he arrived, he had to wait in line, although luckily for him there was only a woman in front of him handing over a book and then leaving. Librarian. How can I help you? She said, asked with an uncurious tone, looking at the brown-haired boy who just approached. John. Russian tale, Alexander Afanasyev, Narodny Ruski Skazki 1864 he said, making the woman write something down on a piece of paper while he looked at his watch. Note. The translation of Narodny Ruski Skazki is Russian folk tales. It consists of 680 traditional Russian tales collected in 8 volumes that Alexander made from 1855 to 1863, with well-known tales such as Vasilisa the Beautiful, The Legend of Marya Moravna the Soldier and Death among others. End of note. Here you go, level 2 he said, handing a paper to the brown-haired boy and pointing to the place, to which he just nodded. Not wasting any time, John headed towards level 2, guided by the paper in his hand and the signs. When he found it, he went into the hallway, checking the bookshelf on his left, having found the book he was looking for after a few seconds. The brown-haired boy grabbed it and opened it, turning several pages until he stopped on one in which he could see the drawing of a woman. John proceeded to touch the edge of the paper and then gently pull it to the left side, removing the image. He revealed that there were hidden things like a token, a rosary with a crucifix and about 5 gold coins, but the most striking thing of all were 13 rings with different names and jewels embedded in them. Although the killer only grabbed the coins and the rosary, putting them in his pants pockets, grabbing and putting the token in his suit pocket at the last minute, John still stared at the rings for a moment. But he pulled himself together and put the paper back in the picture, closing his book, but out of nowhere a man's voice caught his attention. Consider your origins. You were not created to live like beasts, but to follow virtue and knowledge, Dante said, a huge man poetically, showing a book titled Dante's Inferno, and then leaving it on the shelf to his left. You look exhausted, John, he said in a serious tone, while the brown-haired boy also left his book from where he grabbed it and then looked at the man seriously. John, Ernest. I still have time, he said in a serious tone, being completely on guard and inspecting the aforementioned Ernest with his gaze. Ernest. It's almost over, who will notice if I kill you a few minutes earlier? He said, asked seriously, knowing that no one will bother to investigate the death of an excommunicated person like John. John. Did you think carefully about doing this? He said, asked in a serious and threatening manner, not planning to be gentle with the giant in front of him. Ernest. 20 million is too much money, he said in a serious tone, as it was the first time such a reward appeared. John. Not if you can't spend it, he said mockingly, making Ernest get annoyed and take a knife out of his jacket. The brown-haired boy, for his part, just grabbed the book and headed towards the shelf where he grabbed his book, not even caring about leaving Ernest's corpse in plain sight. When he put the book down, John touched a wound on his shoulder, realizing that a lot of blood was coming out, opting to head towards the doctor's office. However, when John left the library, a man glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and then began to follow him. On the Continental. Everyone present was completely stunned by what John did, but it could be noticed how Winston seemed to be proud, while the bodyguards who were sent by Charon were equally or much more stunned than the supernatural beings and the brown-haired adults. Izumi. Why? Why did that man want to kill my son, and what did he mean by 20 million? She said, asked in an incredulous tone, without having any idea about the murderer's excommunication. Winston. Jonathan broke one of the rules of this establishment, and for having done so in a few minutes he will become an excommunicado. And when that happens, all the assassins of this country and other countries will try to kill him to claim a reward of $20 million, he said with a somewhat serious tone, leaving both Izumi and Goro in shock. Izumi. Just for breaking a rule, a damn rule, he has to pay for it with his life, she whispered angrily, having been heard by the supernatural beings in Winston. Winston. Jonathan knew it and still did it, besides he is a man now and must take responsibility for his actions, he said with a somewhat serious tone, having angered the brunette a lot. Izumi. Stop calling him that way. His name is Issei Mizuguchi, is that clear? She said, asked with a serious tone, intending to change hyodou's surname to Issei for hers when he returns with her. Winston. Assuming his last name is Mizuguchi, how sure are you that Jonathan will be your son again once you tell him the truth? Even if you try to hide it from him, it won't do any good, he already knows what you did, but he'll still want to hear it from you yourself, she said in a somewhat serious tone, assuming that John already knew that his parents turned their backs on him. The atmosphere of the place became somewhat tense. The bodyguards who were behind Winston had discreetly taken hold and removed the safety of their weapons in case something bad were to happen, and they had to be prepared. The supernatural beings on the other hand did not say anything, remaining expectant of the situation, as did Goro. Iku. Hey, I think you should keep watching this, he said, drawing everyone's attention, who focused their gaze on the hologram. With John. The aforementioned was now in a neighborhood being soaked by the rain. He went alone to a building, abruptly pushing the door and entering the place, seeing that it had a metal door to his right and another one in the hallway on the left. The brown-haired boy quickly took the path to the left, going to the metal door, knocking on it repeatedly. John. Doc. "Doc, please open up, it's Wick," he exclaimed while he knocked on the door in a hurry until the window of the door opened revealing the doctor. "Doc. Young Wick, you shouldn't be here," he said in an alarming and worried tone, looking out the window in case someone followed the brown-haired man. "John. I need you to help me, Doc," he said in a pleading tone because he needed him to suture the wound on his shoulder. "Doc. Excuse me, young man, but I can't do it," he said in a tone full of pity for not being able to help the man he saved a long time ago. "John. I still have some time," he said pleadingly, only to take out one of the gold coins he had been showing to the doctor. "John. Just 5 minutes, please help me," he said in a confident and pleading tone, making the doctor doubt, but he decided to grab the coin and then close the window and open the door. "Doc. Come on, young man, come in," he said, stepping aside and letting the killer enter his premises. Once John entered, the doctor peeked through the door looking at both sides of the hallway to see if someone was spying on them or followed the brunette, but seeing nothing out of the ordinary, he quickly closed the door and locked it going to where John was. "Doc. Sit there, young man," he said pointing to a chair-shaped stretcher, to which John sat down with his shirt unbuttoned showing his wound to the doctor, who only sat down next to him using cotton on the injury and looking at it subtly. "Doc. Let me see, it's a puncture and a deep one, it must have hit the artery. This will burn," he said, warning the brown-haired boy, grabbing some salt that he had in a small jar and throwing some on the injury, making John feel a great burning pain. Having done that, the doctor began to carefully suture the wound of the murderer who was waiting patiently, but his side ended up focusing on a clock, seeing that he had 1 minute left for his excommunication to begin, which alerted him a lot. "John. Doc, 30 seconds," he said seriously, watching as the seconds ticked by, worrying that the doc wouldn't arrive in time to finish his job. "John, Doc," he said seriously and alarmingly, seeing how there were 15 seconds left until time ran out. "Doc. Calm down, there was very little left," he said with a confident tone, trying to calm the brown-haired boy and being almost halfway there. "John. 5 seconds, Doc," he said in a serious tone, losing all hope that the doc wouldn't arrive on time, making the aforementioned man nervous, who despite that continued doing his job. "John. 3, 2, 1, he said, and the moment he said the last number, the clock rang making the doctor stop. "Doc. I'm so sorry, young Wick," he said in a sad tone, feeling bad for not having been able to arrive on time. "John. It's the rules," he said in an understandable tone, after all he was going to run a big risk if they found out that the doctor helped him while he was excommunicated. "Doc. Rules, he said with a disappointed and annoyed tone, realizing that men like Santino can break those rules and get away with it without any punishment, while others have to pay with their lives for breaking them. Not wasting any time, John grabbed the tweezers that the doctor had and brought a mirror towards him, using it to proceed to suture his own wound, managing to finish in a few seconds, cutting the thread with his mouth and then getting up from his chair and heading towards a shelf full of medicines and bottles with medicinal plants, looking for something that could help him relieve the pain. "Doc. On the last shelf on the right," he said, making John pay attention to him, grabbing a small bottle of pills. "Doc. Yes, take 4 of them. They will help with the pain and give you energy," he said with a confident tone, to which John swallowed one of those pills. Having done that, the brown-haired boy began to button up his shirt and then tuck the edges into his pants, while the doctor went to his desk and took out a Bond Arms Texas Defender pistol from one of the drawers. "Doc. Young Wick, you won't believe that I stopped at this time," he said with a somewhat serious tone loaded with pity, pointing his gun at the brown-haired boy. "John. But he did it," he said with a confident tone, turning to look at the doctor without even caring about the gun he had in his hand. "Doc. But they will know that I told you where the medicine was," he said in a serious tone, alerting the murderer, but the doctor handed him his gun and went to wet a cloth with alcohol, proceeding to sit on the stretcher chair. "John. Where to?" he said after checking if the gun was loaded, looking at the doctor who lifted his clothes a little, pointing at the left side of his abdomen. "Doc. Here, below the rib, try not to hit the." He didn't finish speaking, as John shot him in the place he indicated. John was about to leave the gun on the desk, but. "Doc. Don't go, wait, one won't be enough," he said in a painful tone, removing his bun, revealing his left pectoral muscle, pointing his finger at the clavicular beam, while the brown-haired boy had no choice but to reload the gun. "Doc. Try not to hit." He didn't finish speaking, because John shot again in the place he indicated, making him writhe in pain. "John. Thank you very much, Doc," he said in a very grateful tone towards the aforementioned, leaving the gun on the desk and going to grab his suit and then leave. "Doc. You're welcome, I wish you good luck, young Wick," he said in a painful and difficult tone, causing the brunette to stop and nod his head. John proceeded to leave the doctor's office knowing that he would be fine. Once outside he began to run until in the middle of the avenue, about 3 subjects saw him to be followed by them. Although the brown-haired man was further ahead than them, having reached the end of the avenue, he was undecided whether to take the left or right path, so he decided to take the left path. But as he continued down that path, John saw that on the other side of the street, there were the 4 subjects who were previously chasing him, so he looked around, choosing to go into a lamp store, being careful not to bump into anyone. After a few moments, John crossed a door and began to climb a staircase, seeing a metal door and not hesitating to open it and enter the place, but not before locking the door. The killer was just moving forward in search of an exit, although in the middle of his search, John realized that he was in a kind of museum of mirrors and antique weapons, but when he found an exit, John saw a display case of weapons which he approached, noticing several different antique revolvers. The which he tried to open one of the display cases but couldn't do it since he needed a key, so he opted to break the glass, taking out a Remington 1875 revolver, proceeding to load the weapon with a .44 cartridge, but for some reason it didn't fit. John just put the weapon aside to later look at the other revolvers, again grabbing another Remington 1875, proceeding to remove the cylinder, separate the barrel from the frame, and remove the hammer from both weapons. Until suddenly he heard some shots. The brown-haired boy turned to look at the exit door, not seeing anyone, so in order not to waste time, John took the cylinder of the first revolver and loaded it into it, then fixed a barrel of a Colt 1851 Navy and the hammer of an 1860 Army to its frame. With all that ready, John pulled the hammer back and brought the Franken revolver to his right ear, listening to the mechanism as he turned the cylinder, realizing that the weapon had no faults. The which the brunette loaded the cartridge in the weapon, closing and turning the cylinder, managing to hear how the door behind him opened, so he quickly turned around and shot the man who entered, killing him with a shot to the head. But that already done, John didn't waste any time and was going to hide, knowing that the other assassins were going to look for him, but he turned around because he could hear someone quickly approaching where he was. Hearing that cough and realizing that he only had one left, John just walked towards the axe that was on the ground and then picked it up and raised it, focusing on his only target and taking the necessary pulse. With all that already done, the brunette threw the axe, managing to stick it in the murderer's head, choosing to leave there. Change of scene. Currently we see how John was walking down the sidewalk, looking around for a possible murderer trying to kill him, but he didn't see anyone, so he just continued on his way until crossing the street the lights of a car caught his attention. Being hit and pushed by the vehicle, leaving the murderer in pain, who saw another car heading towards him, having no choice but to get up and being pushed and hit again, being very stunned by both crashes he received. But despite that, even though he was stunned, John got up from the ground and proceeded to enter a stable behind him, being followed by the men who were inside the cars, while 2 other men on motorcycles remained expectant from afar. On the Continental. None of those present deigned to say anything, but mostly the supernatural beings and the brown-haired adults, because they never believed or thought they would be able to see Issei doing such feats, since seeing and saying it seemed to be easy. Winston, on the other hand, was silently looking at his cell phone, while his bodyguards were incredulous at what they saw. "Winston, what are you going to do, Jonathan?" he said, asked in a somewhat confused tone, looking at his phone, having received a notification of a possible increase in the reward for the chestnut. "Searches? Mr. Winston, did you train Mr. Jonathan?" he said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, having decided like the others to respect the chestnut's new and current name. Winston. "That's right, I trained him, but I wasn't the only one, since Jonathan was trained and received help from other people who were under the guidance of a contact of mine. And despite not having a notable talent or gift, he put incredible effort, determination and will into his training," he said with a nostalgic tone, making the supernatural beings remember the efforts that Issei made for them, something they were unable to appreciate. Winston. "Even when he tries to hide it, he is very sentimental and gets carried away by his emotions, becoming impulsive and a little absent-minded. He thinks he owes something to me or someone else who helped him. A clear example is John and Antonio. Both of them had a mutual respect and gratitude for each other, but since you arrived and I found out about your death, I could tell that something was wrong with him, even though he didn't show it," he said in a somewhat serious tone. After all, he knew John well. "Izumi. And why didn't you do something?" Winston. "Most of the time, whether inside or outside the hotel, feelings and emotions are left aside. I also asked him if he was okay, and he answered yes. So I decided to give Jonathan the space he needed to resolve the conflict he had with himself," he said in a somewhat serious tone, "because I wasn't always going to be there to help him, although that didn't mean I wasn't going to be there to give him a hand from time to time." Winston. "I'll be honest with you, I have nothing against you, I'm just the high table's intermediary, so that you can learn about our world and we about yours. But what I won't allow is for you to try to disrespect me on my territory, and if I find out that you have any plans to betray us or use us as your pawns, I'm very sure that the high table will not hesitate to go to war against you," he said in a serious and threatening tone, making it very clear why he was the manager of the Continental. Searches, it is the least we will try to do, Mr. Winston. We may have had some disagreements, but I am sure that our alliance will grow over time, he said with a sincere and firm tone, something that Winston did not fully believe in the Mao's words. Winston. I hope the same, Mao Lucifer, he said with a sincere tone, hiding very well his distrust towards the Redeed. Change of scene plus with John. After a few minutes, we can see how John was walking towards the ticket booth of a theater, in which there was a woman behind the glass, when the brown-haired man arrived and placed his left hand against the glass to get the woman's attention. The theater is closed, come back tomorrow, he said in a serious tone, but suddenly John put the rosary against the glass, making the woman look at him. After doing that, John was able to enter the theater, although while hiding in a corner, a man saw the moment in which the brown-haired man entered the building, choosing to leave from there. Meanwhile with the murderer, he entered the theater going to where 3 men were sitting at a table in front of them. When he was in front of them, John placed the rosary on the table. Man. 1 Koroshiv Remia Proshlo, he said in a somewhat nostalgic tone, looking at John, who took the token and coins out of his pockets, placing them on the table as well. Translation: It's been a while. Man. 1 Iro, he said in a serious tone, pointing at the chestnut's belt, leaving him no choice but to take it off and then put it on the table. Translation: And the belt. Man. 2 Because he yemu put, he said with a sign, attracting the attention of a guard who approached while John grabbed the rosary. Translation: Show him the way. John. Let's go, he said in a serious tone, saying goodbye to the 3 men with whom he had trained in the past. The 3 of us Uvidimsia, he said in a serious tone, watching as the guard and John were leaving. Translation: See you later. Focusing on John, he followed the guard until he reached the amphitheater, where he managed to see a girl dancing ballet on the stage, turning around several times until she Stella Idosnova said authoritatively, a woman who was sitting in the middle of the place, to which the girl got up from the ground and started spinning around again. Translation: Do it again. Stepping aside, the guard let John go first, to which he accepted the gesture and walked over to the woman, who said Stella Idosnova again when he saw the girl stumble again. By the time John was close to the woman, she looked at him for a second but ignored him, while the killer knelt down with his head down. Director. Giordani, why have you come? She said, asked in a serious tone, without even looking at John, who only showed her the rosary he had tangled in his right hand. The director. Are you presenting this to me as an answer? She said, asked in a serious and indignant tone, to which John raised his head, revealing a vulnerable expression. Issei. I still have my protection, he said with a respectful tone, still showing that vulnerable face. The headmistress. After the chaos you've caused these past few days, do you still think your protection is valid? Have you forgotten that the Ruskaroma is linked to the high table, and that the high table is above all else? They could kill me for even speaking to you. You want to honor me by luring death to my doorstep, she said in a serious tone, while John looked at the floor again. Director. Oh Giordani, what's happening to you? She said, asked with a disappointed tone, failing to recognize the man she trained and disciplined. Issei Yidzardani Ivanovich, Yaditya Belarusi, Sirota Vishego Plemeni Tai Obyazin Nepomich, he said in a serious tone, looking penetratingly at the director. Translation: I am Giordani Jovanovich, I am a child from Belarus, an orphan of your tribe, you must help me. Issei. You owe me. An oath was made, he said with a serious and demanding tone, while the director remained silent for a moment. Director. Rooney, stop it, she exclaimed authoritatively towards the girl, who just let herself fall to the ground being very tired, while the director got up to just look at John. The director. I'm Noi, she said seriously, and John wasted no time getting up and starting to follow the director. Translation: Come with me. On the Continental. The supernatural beings and the 2 brown-haired adults were more than surprised to see how Issei spoke Russian as fluently as if he had spoken it all his life, although he partly confused everyone with the conversation. Boru. What did you mean when you said your name is Giordani Jovanovich and that you are a boy from Belarus? He said, asked in a confused tone, saying the question that everyone had inside their heads. Winston. I asked a director to take Jonathan to Belarus to train him and at the same time be a temporary member of the Ruskaroma, the Russian mafia of New York. And so as not to always have to carry the same name, Jonathan changed his name to Giordani Jovanovich, an identity he would take in case of emergencies. Although she became fond of Jonathan to the point of seeing him as a son, but that is normal after all, she sees all her students as her sons and daughters. Izumi. That woman has no right to see him as her son, she said with a serious and annoyed tone, not being able to bear the idea of someone stealing her son. Winston. And do you have the right to call yourself and consider yourself a mother? He said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, having silenced Izumi who, annoyed, looked at the hologram like the others. With John. We watched as John was walking with the director and some guards, having entered a kind of dressing room in which there were several girls, either under or over 18, who were stretching and ready to dance. Director. I don't owe you anything, and no one owes you anything, Giordani. When my new students arrive here they only want one thing, she said in a serious tone, stopping to look at one of her students. Headmistress. A life without suffering. I try to persuade them to forget about these childish notions, but as you know, art is pain, life is suffering, she said in a serious tone, watching as one of her students removed the nail from her big toe, then continued on her way, followed by John and the guards, and then they went down a staircase. The director. I don't know how you did it, but you managed to become what you are now, but don't forget that this is where you started. Seriously, though? Ubichelovika na Matarik, talko za nogo mrtvogo, she said, asked in a serious and disappointed tone, looking at the brown-haired boy. Translation: killing a man on the mainland, just for one dead person. Don ustelil ido na talko dlya mrtvogo chelovika. No, I edit mrtvitsnik tonibid, she said with a serious tone, following the director. Translation: I didn't do it just for a dead person. Besides, that dead person isn't just anyone. Director. Yazneu, Zanad Antonio. You taste vitelno slishkum sentimentales Zardani, she said in a somewhat mocking tone, continuing on her way until she reached a room in which a couple of boys over 18 years old were having a practice fight at the same time that boys were attentively watching said fight. Translation: I know, Jonad Antonio. You really are too sentimental, Giordani. Director. Karashi Vaspamininiya, she said with a nostalgic tone and a small smile, looking at John, who remembered the training he did with his sisters. Translation: good memories. They continued on their way, but after a few moments they came to a room where some girls were practicing ballet, although they continued on their way until they reached a door guarded by two guards. Who opened it, letting the director, John and the guards enter, although the latter positioned themselves in the corners of the place. Director. Sitting, she said with an authoritative tone, while John was going to sit down but focused on both men, then sat down looking at the woman who trained him. The director. Even if I wanted to, I can't help you, Giordani. The high table wants your life. How do you fight against the wind? How do you crush the mountains? How do you bury the ocean? How do you escape from the light? Of course you can enter the darkness, but it is clean. Now Giordani, tell me, what is it that you are looking for? She said, asked with a serious and curious tone, looking at the brown-haired boy. John. Safe conduct, he said with a serious tone, planning to go to a specific place. The director. Where do you want to go? She said, asked in a curious way and with a smile, knowing that that was going to be easy for her to do. Issei. Casablanca, he said with a serious tone, intending to go to the port city of Morocco. The director. Exhaling: the road to paradise begins in hell, she said with a somewhat serious tone, while John brought the rosary he had in his hand towards her. Director. So be it, give me your receipt and I will tear it up. If you wish. She said, asked in a somewhat serious tone, to which John unraveled the rosary and handed it to the woman. She simply broke it, taking the crucifix and giving it to a guard, who grabbed it and approached a lit fireplace, grabbing a metal bar, putting the cross on the end, and then proceeding to burn it in the fireplace. John, on the other hand, got up from his seat, taking off his suit and unbuttoning his shirt, turning the chair around and sitting down, revealing his back on which a huge tattoo could be seen. Director. With this, Giordani, your protection is taken, she said in a serious tone, while the bald man took the bar out of the fireplace to just stick it into the assassin's back, making him grunt in pain. Director. You will never be able to go home again, to the lifeboat. Dus vidania, she said in a serious and firm tone, looking at the man who removed the metal bar from John's back, then left the room. John. Dus vidania, he said in a serious and painful tone, then stood up feeling a great pain in his back. Translation: goodbye. On the Continental. The supernatural beings and the brown-haired adults were very confused because they did not understand almost anything of what they saw, so they just looked at Winston, waiting for him to answer their questions. Bisaka. Mr. Winston, she didn't finish speaking because the aforementioned man interrupted her. Winston. I'll be brief. The rosary that Jonathan had represents a favor that the director owed him, a big favor, and when she redeemed it, Jonathan was denied as a possible future member of the Ruska Roma. And if he had the opportunity to set foot in its facilities before, now he will never be able to do so again, he said with a somewhat serious tone, knowing that it was a system similar to the tokens. Arena. But where is that Casablanca, and what will Ice Kun do there? She said, asked with a curious and confused tone, making the others remember that. Winston. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's going to collect another favor, he said with a somewhat confident tone, remembering the card that John had taken from that book. Winston. Let's continue tomorrow, Miss Mizuguchi, Mr. Hyodou, are you going to another hotel or would you like to spend the night here? He said, asked in a curious tone, getting up from his seat and looking at both of them. Boru. I would like to spend the night here, how much does the accommodation cost? He said asked curiously, taking his wallet out of his pants pocket. Winston. We don't do that here, Mr. Hyodou. We only accept gold coins, but I'll let you spend the night here in exchange for you and your wife. He didn't finish speaking, because Izumi interrupted him. Izumi. Ex-wife, she said seriously, not wanting to know anything about Goru. Winston. Ex-wife, pay for your stay when you get the coins, he said in a somewhat serious tone, to which Goru put away his wallet. Goru. It seems reasonable to me, I really appreciate it, he said in a grateful tone, looking at Izumi who, annoyed, looked away. Winston. You're welcome, please follow me so I can give you the keys to your rooms, he said, proceeding to leave the roof. Without further ado, everyone proceeded to follow Winston. Izumi for her part remained silent, but inside she was quite angry with the supernatural beings and her son's ex-partners, although she was very sure that she was going to obtain the brown-haired man's forgiveness, or most likely not. Chapter 6. Excommunicated Part 2. Authors Pav. Focusing on the Continental Bar, we can see how one of the hotel's concierges entered the place accompanied by Izumi, who looked at everything around her. From the mercenaries who were drinking with their comrades, to the luxurious structure of which the canteen was made. Of course, without stopping to follow the concierge, who guided her to a secluded place, where Winston was sitting and doing his job as manager of the Continental with enormous calm. Mr. Winston, excuse me for interrupting you. But the young lady asked me to bring her to you, the concierge said in a respectful and somewhat embarrassed manner, without looking at his boss's face. All right, Antonio. You may go, said Winston in a relaxed tone, while the janitor left without saying a single word. Don't just stand there, Miss Izumi. Please have a seat, Winston commented, pointing to the sofa in front of him, as the brunette sat down. Would you like something to drink? Asked the hotel manager, taking a sip of his Negroni. No need, in fact I came here to apologize for my behavior on the roof of your hotel, Izumi commented, saddened by the outburst of her emotions that she had. I accept your apology. But I doubt you came all the way here just to tell me that, Winston commented, a little interested in the brunette's presence. Sai, could you tell me something about Jonathan? Please, Izumi requested politely, with the intrigue of wanting to know if the man who was once her son was still the same, or at least if he kept something of what he was. Winston let out a deep sigh upon hearing that, then raised his glass, catching the bartender's attention despite the distance and the people they were standing around. 5 minutes later, the same bartender appeared in front of Izumi and Winston, taking away the latter's drink and leaving 2 new ones, which were a daiquiri for Izumi and an old-fashioned for Winston. Although the brunette was going to refuse at first, she couldn't do so, since the man at the bar left before she could say anything to her. Jonathan has always been someone very determined and stubborn, Winston confessed with some nostalgia, remembering an event that he could tell the brunette. Many years ago, in the Continental. Standing with Sharon, Winston was conversing with his loyal concierge regarding changes they could make to the hotel while heading to a particular location. Upon reaching their destination, which was a training room, they both watched from a distance as John, barely recovered from his wounds, was punching a punching bag. This child will make me even grayer than I already have, Winston commented complainingly, due to the brunette's stubborn and senseless attitude. Don't you think you're overexerting yourself a bit too much? Jonathan, the manager asked seriously, approaching the teenager who stopped and looked at Winston, then continued with his own thing. I've pushed my limits before, I can do it again, John replied between gasps, yet his determination was evident as he gave the sandbag a right hook. What if you can't do it? What if before you surpass your limits, you die trying? Questioned the manager, observing the bandages that covered John's entire torso, which were totally stained with blood and sweat. I will come back to life one way or another. I will return to pay my debt that I have with you, John declared firmly, making Winston sigh, while Sharon stood beside his boss. It seems you'll have to prepare your retirement papers, Sir, Sharon commented with some humor, realizing that Winston will have trouble controlling John. Back to the present. Even though he's an adult, inside he's still the same teenager I met several years ago, Winston finished recounting as he finished his drink. I understand, Izumi commented, taking a sip of her daiquiri. If you don't mind, could you tell me what Issei was like? Winston asked with interest regarding his pupil's past life. Issei was a good boy. His hormones were raging, but far from it, he was very protective of everyone and showed us tremendous affection, the brunette answered melancholically, wondering inside how she could have been able to turn her back on her son. And even though now, after many years, she had the opportunity to meet him again and ask for forgiveness from the bottom of her heart, deep inside, she knew very well that she would not be forgiven, and she did not deserve it, and there was nothing she could do to change it. Except for one thing. Mr. Winston, let there be no misunderstanding. "I need you to do me a favor," Izumi said in an almost pleading manner, knowing that Winston was the best person, if not the only one, she could count on to make her request come true. "What do you need?" asked the manager, curious about what Izumi was going to ask him, but he had a slight idea of what it could be. Tokyo General Library. Now, focusing on Ria's. The aforementioned was standing in line at the Tokyo General Library, the same one where John stopped and fought Ernest. Although returning to the main topic, the Redeed was there to find out about the ring she saw inside that book. However, she was not the only one who wanted to find out, as the rest of the girls also wanted to go with her, but she refused and convinced them to stay at the hotel to protect the leaders in case an enemy attack took place. "It's your turn, darling," the Redeed heard, something that brought her back to the real world, where she saw that the line of people had disappeared without her realizing it. So without wasting any time she approached the booth, where she found the same lady who had helped her ex. "What do you need?" the librarian asked neutrally, looking at Ria's. "I'm looking for Russian Tale by Alexander Afanasiev, Narodny Ruski Saki, 1864, answered the Grimoire, remembering everything and even the location of said book, but she wanted to make sure that it was still in the library. "Here you go, it's on level 2, said the lady, handing a piece of paper to Ria's, which was enough to clear up the insecurity she had, although, a concern began to emerge from within her at what she might find. "I appreciate it," Ria said, hiding her uneasiness and grabbing the sheet, setting off towards the second floor of the establishment. After walking for a few short minutes, the Grimoire stood in front of the bookshelf, staring at the spine of the book she was looking for. Stretching out her right arm shakily, Riaz grabbed the book and pulled it out of its place, then opened it and began searching for the image of Vasilisa the Beautiful. Once found, Riaz inhaled and exhaled deeply several times in an attempt to calm down. When she was a little calm, the demon pulled the image to the left side, finding the same rings that she saw the day before through the hologram. More shaky than before, Riaz grabbed one of the rings that had a small but sparkling citrine as an ornament, along with some dried blood that looked like it hadn't been removed in years. However, looking closer at the ring, the Redeed noticed that there was something written on the back that said for Kaneko. With her eyes wide open in surprise and her heart beating 1,000 times a second, the Grimoire checked the other rings, which had the names of those who were once Issei's girlfriends. From Asia, Akeno, Roswis and Arena to Penemu, Gabriel, Yasaka and Elmenhild. Aside from their names carved into the rings, Riaz noticed that the jewels embedded in them represented the color of her friend's eyes or hair. However, none of the things described above represented her, and in fact, it seemed that there was no ring that had her name on it. And although the latter affected him strongly, what affected him most was the fact that he found out that his ex-partner was going to propose a legitimate marriage to all of them. Throwing the book away along with the rings, a devastated Riaz turned around and leaned against the bookshelf, letting herself fall as she burst into tears from the guilt that hurt her inside. "There it is, this is what I've been waiting to see for a long time," a voice very well known to the Redeed said maliciously. "Leave me alone," Riaz shouted angrily towards the person who stood in front of her, who was none other than Issei himself, but his younger 17-year-old version. "Although if we get down to it, my real self wouldn't have cared. It seems I surpass you and the others," commented Issei sitting next to Riaz. "Shut up," the Redeed exclaimed again, this time covering her ears so as not to hear her fake ex-lover. "Come on, dear, we both know that I'm a part of your mind, so there's no point in covering your ears," the brunette emphasized, knowing that he was a product of the Grimoire's guilt and regret. "So no matter how many times you tell him, would you propose to him, or even if you offer him your body, the real me is going to reject you again and again, because that's how he must have felt when all of you betrayed him because of your greed," said the fake Issei, breaking the Redeed's fragile patience. "Shut up," Riaz shouted angrily, unconsciously letting out her demonic power and generating a strong wave of wind. This caused dozens of books and even people walking around to fall to the ground. But remembering that she was in a public place, Riaz quickly grabbed all the rings and then proceeded to leave the library, but not before casting a spell that erased the memory of all the people present about what had just happened. Casablanca, Morocco. It was a sunny afternoon in Morocco, and on the coasts of that place a lot of people were walking around buying fish or other things for dinner. Although focusing on John, he walked without paying attention to anyone and with the objective of leaving his current location. Walking through the streets of Casablanca, the brown-haired man was furtively looking around for assassins, or at least detecting one through his killer instinct. Something that didn't take him long to realize, having passed in front of two Moroccans who were smoking, who, seeing that the brown-haired man had moved far enough away, sent a message to a comrade through a cell phone and then got up from their seats and started following John. In a slight change of scene, the killer was advancing along a narrow path due to the houses on both sides, while several meters behind him, a man was following him. But instead of stopping and killing him, he continued on his way until he reached a double path, where he chose the one on the left. However, before he had gone more than 10 steps, a Moroccan emerged from the shadows of a wall and stood in front of John, who turned around and found himself facing the same two Moroccans as before. They, along with their comrade, unsheathed some huge knives they were hiding in their clothes almost at the same time. Taking the initiative, John threw himself at the assassin behind him, who, by reflex, made 2 cuts at nothing because the brunette evaded them and then knocked the Moroccan down with a kick to the feet. Meanwhile, the other 2 charged at John before he could disarm his partner. Getting up from the ground, John began to back away, watching both assassins to see who was going to strike first. When he realized that the Moroccan on the right was going to do it, the brown-haired man stepped aside, dodging the blow he was about to receive. And without even hesitating, John grabbed the man by the same arm that held the dagger, but instead of untying him or knocking him down, John used it to protect himself from a stab that the Moroccan on the left was going to give him. The Moroccan, who was injured by his companion, grunted in pain. Using all his strength and energy, the brown-haired boy pushed both assassins against a wall, causing more pain to the one in the middle, and in the face of this, it didn't cost John much to take out his knife, while the other assassin had no idea what to do. However, the assassin who was once on the ground was now behind John, almost about to stab him in the back, something the brunette realized too late and was sure he wouldn't be able to evade. But before anything bad could happen, that same man was killed by a gunshot to the head, something that baffled both the killers and John for that. Meanwhile, a 44-year-old man in waiter's clothes was holding a Colt 1911. "I'm sorry," said the waiter, putting away his gun and approaching the 3 assassins. "That's enough, gentlemen." "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure," the man warned the 2 Moroccans, slapping John on the back. "Unfortunately, they can't touch our friend." "I'm sorry," said the assassin who was against the wall seriously, while the other couldn't say anything because of the pain he felt in his back. "He is an excommunicated person." "I'm sorry to hear that you were here," the waiter confessed, to which John stopped applying force to just stand up straight and return the knife to its owner. Well, it seems that management granted him amnesty. Not wanting to end up like his dead companion, the wounded assassin grabbed his gun with some difficulty, and after that, with the help of his living friend, they set off in search of a doctor. On the other hand, John looked at the waiter who had lit a cigarette and then gave the brown-haired man a signal to continue on his way. "Mr. Jonathan, would you be so kind as to follow me?" the waiter requested politely in changing language, receiving a nod from the Baba Yaga. "By the way, welcome to Casablanca, Mr. Wick," the waiter mentioned, to which John looked at the dead Moroccan. "Thank you," John commented, both for the help and the welcome. At the Continental, Tokyo. Having witnessed John's arrival in Morocco via hologram, none of the spectators said anything. Instead, they were already getting used to the world of assassins. Although, Yusaka and Auden could not see that since they had gone to their respective factions, but not before having said goodbye to Winston and thanked him for his hospitality. "That was close," said the manager of the Continental, capturing the attention of the supernatural beings. "Mr. Winston, I would like to ask you a question," Azazel requested with a raised finger. "Go ahead," Winston agreed simply. "Regarding the excommunicated, can they all receive amnesty from the Continentals?" asked the former leader of the Fallen with interest in how John was saved and received by the waiter. "That depends," Winston answered with some mystery, but some had an idea about that. "Connections and popularity, right?" Michael said with some doubt. "Not only that. No matter how many contacts or popularity one has, it's useless unless the manager couldn't finish speaking, as he was interrupted by Serziches. That they owe you something, or it could also be because of the respect and fear that you inspire the Crimson Satan," finished Winston's sentence, receiving a nod from him. To which the others realized that the world of assassins and the supernatural were not so different after all. "That's right. During the years that Jonathan was in service, he made a lot of connections. But don't be mistaken, aside from people who owe him something or help him out of respect or fear, there are also people who trust him a lot," Winston commented. However, upon hearing that a bunch of assassins trusted John, Issei appeared in everyone's head, making him feel bad, except for a few. Although entering the terrace, Charon made an appearance, capturing the attention of both his boss and the supernatural beings, few of whom raised their heads to listen to what the receptionist had to report. "Sir, excuse the inconvenience, but an adjudicator wants to see you," Charon informed in his usual polite tone, but this time it was accompanied by some seriousness. "Standing, I'll be back in a little while, leaders. In the meantime, you can do or ask for whatever you want," said Winston, adjusting his tie, leaving his guests half bewildered regarding the adjudicator. Walking off the terrace and following Charon, Winston's calm demeanor changed to a serious one, knowing that he had zero chance of stopping the adjudicator from causing him a huge problem. After a few minutes, Winston arrived at a room where there was a 33-year-old woman with short black hair and a military style, with a tattoo on the left side of her neck with a German script that read in falling dot. She was wearing a jacket over a long-sleeved shirt, leather gloves, jeans and shoes, all black, like the briefcase she was carrying. Sorry I'm late, but I had some things to attend to. Winston apologized to the woman while approaching her and vice versa. Yes, the faction leaders, I don't need to mention them. But I'm here for the adjudicator could not continue speaking as she was interrupted by the manager of the Continental. John Wick, I know, so I'll be brief, said Winston, taking a small pause. To be honest, I did everything in my power, but nothing worked, finished explaining the older man, making the woman become more serious than she already was. Mr. Wick broke the rules, the adjudicator stressed, something that should never be overlooked, no matter who it is. He did, yes, but what about Santino D'Antonio? Winston mentioned the new member of the Supreme Order because of the rumors circulating that he killed his sister to get his position. As far as status is concerned, Mr. Wick does not come close to Mr. D'Antonio, may he rest in peace, the Order's envoy commented, but realized that she was straying from the topic. But back to the general matter. I have not come because of Mr. Wick, but because he broke the rules in this very hotel. He revealed the real reason for his presence at the Continental. Blood was spilled on the Continental, am I wrong? He said, asked seriously, looking at Winston. Not at all. In fact, since the corpse has not yet been claimed by its family, it is cooling off within these walls, the manager replied, looking around. I would like to see it, he commented to make his report more specific. Change of scene. Coming out of an elevator, the adjudicator and Winston began to walk until they entered a room that was on their left. After that they took a few steps and then changed direction, this time to the right. By doing so, both had arrived at a kind of crematorium where they found a pile of corpses wrapped in black bags. But both the adjudicator and Winston focused and approached Santino's body, which was lying on a metal stretcher and was covered up to the chest by a blanket. Santino D'Antonio, said the adjudicator once near the body of the aforementioned. The new member of the Supreme Order killed by Mr. Wick while seeking asylum on the Continental, the woman commented, looking closely at the bullet wound Santino had in his head. I guess it was with a .45 ACP diagnosis, almost without doubt, but he needed the weapon to confirm it. At what point did you lose or stop controlling Mr. Wick's actions? From what I've heard, he always remained faithful to you, and your word, said, asked the high table agent in a serious tone, looking at the hotel manager. Jonathan has always been like that, even if it doesn't seem like it. One day he followed my orders, and the next he did what he wanted, said Winston, expressing the greatest honesty he could. Whether what you say is true or not, he is still alive because you allowed it. I suppose it is because of the appreciation you have for him. After all, you have known Mr. Wick since he was a teenager. So I dare say you see him as the son you never had, said the adjudicator, wanting to see how Winston would react to the last thing. But the relationship that Jonathan Wick and I have is both professional and friendly. We don't have time to go play in the park, Winston declared in a serious tone, standing firm before the high table agent. Whatever their relationship is, it doesn't change the fact that instead of killing him or stopping him, she supported him and let him escape after murdering Santino D'Antonio in front of his eyes. The adjudicator changed the subject, knowing that she couldn't get Winston out of his mind. I made him become an excommunicated, he emphasized his actions after that moment. Giving him an hour to prepare, the adjudicator emphasized the mistake that the manager made. He broke the rules at the hotel I run, Winston excused himself, knowing that he could do nothing more to defend himself from the adjudicator. That's the problem, your hotel. Where is your loyalty? She said, asked in a serious tone, while Winston looked indignantly at the woman. I have served the order and only the order for more than 40 years, the manager answered without hesitation. So? Asked the adjudicator, but this time she didn't receive a single answer from Winston. I understand that you have your loyalties, but this cannot be ignored. I will be direct, I have come to assign it to you. You have a week to resolve your affairs, revealed the envoy of the order, surprising Winston upon hearing her words. Excuse me, Winston complained, surprised, not believing that he would be relieved of his post. When the deadline expires, your successor will be appointed, said the adjudicator without further ado. There are rules, Mr. Winston. They are the only thing that differentiates us. She did not finish speaking when she was interrupted by Winston. About the animals, the temporary manager completed seriously. Exactly. He's 7 days old, the adjudicator commented, setting off to leave the crematorium, but stopped halfway to look at Winston. In the meantime, if you need any help with your transition, I'll be in room 217, said the adjudicator, not only to relieve Winston of his duties early, but also to finish his work. I hope you enjoy your stay at the Continental, Winston commented, trying to hide the falseness of his words, while the adjudicator continued on her way to continue doing her duty. Change of scene. Walking at a slow but steady pace through the main hall of the Continental, Winston was deep in thought, and despite the fact that he was about to be replaced from the hotel he was currently stepping into, for some reason, a small smile escaped the older man. Mr. Winston Surzich's voice caught the attention of the aforementioned, who lost that smile in a second and turned around, seeing that the leaders of the biblical faction were approaching him. "What can I do for you?" Leaders Winston said asked somewhat curiously upon being named by the aforementioned. "Nothing. In fact, to be honest, we observed your conversation with the adjudicator Surzich's revealed, somewhat saddened by his and his friend's actions," eliciting a small sigh from Winston. "I suppose you already know that I will be removed from my position," commented the current manager, as much a statement as a doubt. "I know it's an issue." Michael couldn't continue speaking because the manager cut him off. "Don't worry. They have the right to know what's going on anyway." Winston cut off the leader of the Angel's speech calmly, not being able to care less about what the biblical trio did. "No offense, could you tell us what function the adjudicators perform?" asked Azazel with an intrigued tone, wanting to know how much power those people had. "The adjudicators are agents of the Supreme Order and representatives of a person called the Regent," Winston answered, making the three of them interested in this regent, but they decided to let Winston continue with his thing. "Its main function is to adjudicate those who dared to break the rules set by the Supreme Order, and not only them, but also those who gave them a hand." Winston finished explaining, and without any problem Surzich's, Michael and Azazel understood everything. "If that is their function, why didn't they take charge of assigning that Santino D'Antonio?" asked Azazel with a confused tone, remembering everything he heard about him. "Unfortunately, the adjudicators have no control over the members of the High Table. For that to happen, 10 of the 12 members must agree, or the regent must order it to do so," Winston answered in a somewhat serious tone. "But what about the regent? Who is he?" asked Michael, not having heard about that person before like his two friends. "I would like to tell you all about him, but the only thing we know is that he and only he is above the Supreme Order," Winston replied, surprising the three leaders a little. "And who knows, maybe it was he who ordered the order to make an alliance with you." Winston shared his speculation with the three leaders. Wanting to know more about the High Table, Winston and the three leaders made their way to the roof to speak in more privacy. But on the other hand, entering the hotel through the main door, Riaz was in low spirits, something that coincidentally, her friend saw from a distance heading quickly towards her. The first to arrive was Akeno, who began to check what was happening to her king, realizing that his eyes were very red from crying so much. "Asia, go get a glass of water," he asked, half fallen, towards the former nun, who quickly went to get what he asked for. "Riaz, what happened? What did you find?" Sona asked, worried about her friend, who without saying anything opened her hands revealing 13 rings. Not knowing what to say, each of them grabbed a ring, almost instantly noticing the names that were written on it, something that left them perplexed when they found out what their ex-partner had planned for them. Of course, that devastated them beyond belief, enough so that those who did not share a romantic relationship with the brunette proceeded to take them to the armchairs that were nearby. "NT. When I refer to those who did not have a romantic relationship with Issei, they are Tsubaki, Haruko, Tsubasa, Tomo, Ria and Momo." Once seated, Issei's former lovers looked closely at the rings that belonged to each of them. The only trace left of the man who loved them was now in the palms of their hands, unlike one, Ria's. "Where's your ring, Riaz?" Akeno asked without any hint of encouragement, looking at her friend. "I don't know," the Redeed answered in a dejected manner, and due to the absolute silence between them, it was enough for them to hear Irina's sobs. "Do you think Ice-kun was going to propose to us that day?" Irina asked through tears, her voice breaking with each word she said. The rest of the girls, upon hearing the former angel's question, couldn't help but share that same thought, beginning to feel like that memory now hurt more than before. Meanwhile, the Gremory turned to see Issei, a product of her imagination, who was biting his nails. "Yes. I was going to do it," the imaginary Issei said simply, then continued with his thing. "No," Riaz answered, capturing the girl's attention with her response. "Are you sure, Riaz?" Akeno asked, wiping the tears that fell down her cheekbones with a handkerchief. "Yes. Knowing him, Ice would have taken us to a beautiful evening, and when everything was over, he would have knelt before us and proposed to us," Riaz answered dreamily, something that changed the attitude and thoughts her friends had. "Ha! You don't even believe that yourself," commented the fake Issei next to her, something that annoyed her, but before she could say anything, they all heard Asia's unmistakable scream and the sound of glass breaking. Without even hesitating, they all stood up from their seats and turned their gaze towards the aforementioned, who was lying on the floor somewhat wet. At the same time, a person covered in a long brown coat advanced without looking back. "Asia, are you okay?" asked a worried Zenobia about her religion friend. "Yes, I am," the blonde answered calmly, not even being angry with the person she collided with. That damn thing, Riaz expressed an annoyed, and since she was unable to take it out on the imaginary Issei, she saw the opportunity to do it with that person. But, Akeno grabbed her by the arm before she could take a single step. Calm down, Riaz. Remember that we are not allowed to make a scene here, Akeno said seriously, making the Grimoire remember the order her brother gave her. Observing that the person was a woman in her 30s, with brown hair and a formal maroon-colored outfit under that coat. Which was talking to a receptionist, and without having a choice, they all decided to leave her aside, while Asia proceeded to clean up the mess she made. Although a cleaning staff stopped the blonde and he was in charge of cleaning it. Soup Kitchen, New York, United States. Inside an office with a bunch of beggars. A 57-year-old man with his hair shaved and wearing homeless clothes. He was staring intently at a wall where photos of Santino D'Antonio's guards, the aforementioned, and John Wick hung. Sir, a beggar spoke to the man, while handing him a disposable cell phone. An adjudicator wants to speak with you, the beggar continued speaking, to which the man grabbed the device and with a simple movement of his hand, made everyone leave the office to have privacy. Hello, said the man once all his employees had left. I suppose you must be the Bowery King, spoke from the other end of the line, the same adjudicator who was with Winston at the Continental. That's right. I hope you were well received in my control room, said the king with false politeness, as he sat down. Yes. I must admit I'm surprised you've managed to achieve all this with pigeons, the adjudicator commented indifferently. To you they may be rats with wings, but to me, they are the most advanced technology that man has ever had, said the king of the neighborhood with disdain, although he was straying from the subject, but getting to the point. What the hell do you want? Asked the man seriously, not caring who he was talking to. I wanted to be where I don't go, answered the adjudicator, confusing the king with her response. What didn't happen? He asked again, but this time annoyed by the beating around the bush the order's envoy was taking. Where John Wick's death didn't happen, the adjudicator answered this time seriously, now informing the king of what was happening. I've always believed that it's optional to execute contracts. Besides, I have no problem with John Wick enough to kill him, the king explained calmly. Yet you gave Mr. Wick a Kimmer 1911, knowing that he was going to use it against the order. The same Kimmer 1911 that I'm showing your workers right now, the adjudicator commented seriously, causing the Bowery King to become serious as well. For your information, in Tokyo there are hundreds of security cameras monitoring 24 hours a day, that includes the subway, revealed the high table agent, leaving the king without excuses or words to defend himself. He gave 7 bullets to John Wick. The Supreme Order will give him 7 days to abandon his post and find a new refuge for his pigeons, declared the adjudicator, something that surprised the king, but seconds later, that made him laugh loudly. That lasted for several seconds. Honey, said the king, laughing and then turning serious. Do you know what the neighborhood is, adjudicator? Do you know what happens when I move my hand? He asked, raising his voice without receiving any answer. No. Well, I'll tell him. My throne has no replacement because I am the throne, baby. I am the neighborhood, said the king in a loud voice, in a proud and confident manner, ready to challenge the Supreme Order for his throne. I am what you deny to see when you walk alone down the street at night, the king threatened, thinking of who he could kill as a declaration of war on the high command of the criminal world. Whatever it is, the neighborhoods are mine and mine alone, he said in a determined tone, ready not only to defend his position, but also his people. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're above the rules. Because no one is, the adjudicator said seriously on the other end of the phone. You have 7 days. After those words, the call was cut off and the Bowery King angrily left the cell phone on his desk. Casablanca, Morocco. At night and in the middle of the street, the waiter and John were moving towards a huge building that looked almost like a castle. While the outside was packed with people and vehicles, so much so that it was even affecting the passage of one or another car. Mr. Jonathan, it's been a long time since you honored our beautiful city with your presence, the waiter said in a melancholic manner, observing that the young man was now a man. I need to talk to. Yes, with Miss Alzwar. She is waiting for you. The waiter cut off the assassin's speech to step aside so that John could enter the building, followed by him. Once inside, John saw a huge crowd partying there. Some men were gathered around watching a woman dance shikit, others were drinking, and the few remaining were dancing amongst themselves. Shikit is a Moroccan dance known as belly dance or arabesque, which is characterized by sensual hip movements, pelvic undulations and sensual hand movements. Welcome to the Continental of Morocco. I hope it continues to be to your liking, commented the waiter in a polite manner, while walking and being followed by the chestnut. This way. Miss Alzwar is not expecting any man, the man continued speaking without forgetting his main job. In a small change of scene, the waiter pulled aside a curtain so that John could enter without problems, something that he appreciated, and entered, observing the luxurious room that he arrived at. I wish you luck, Mr. Jonathan. Best of luck, the waiter commented and then left the room, and without being able to avoid it, he let out a small malicious laugh. John only took a few steps into the place until he saw a small table on which there were 3 frames with the same photo. Approaching and grabbing one of the previously mentioned, he saw a 45-year-old woman accompanied by a 12-year-old girl and 2 Belgian shepherd dogs of different colors. But feeling a strong killer instinct ahead, John raised his head, seeing how one of the dogs that was in the photo was in front of his eyes. Feeling another killer instinct coming from his back, the brown-haired boy turned around looking at the missing dog. "Do you like dogs, John?" asked a female voice emerging from the shadows with a gun in hand. "Sophia?" asked John, leaving the photo from where he grabbed it and raising his hands. Emerging from the darkness, it was revealed that it was the same woman from the photo, except that she was now 52 years old. But, without even hesitating, she quickly raised her gun and shot John in the right shoulder, something that didn't hurt him, but the power of the shot was still strong enough to knock him to the ground. "Sophia, you can't kill someone who has your token," the brown-haired boy exclaimed, warned while lying on the ground in case the aforementioned girl shot him again. "I didn't kill you, I just shot you." "Nice suit," Sophia said sarcastically, observing how the bullet didn't even go through the suit. "Nice to see you too," John commented in the same tone as his old friend, removing the bullet he had in his bag. "I should blow your head off now," Sophia said in a serious tone, still pointing at John's head. "I know," said John, sitting on the floor slowly, then putting his left hand in the pocket inside his jacket. "No, don't even think about doing it," said Sophia in a serious tone, almost becoming angry, while John took out a token from his suit and proceeded to stand up. "You're excommunicated, John. So that token isn't worth a damn," Sophia spat with venom, to which the brown-haired boy, once standing, opened the token and showed her a bloody footprint that was there. "This is your blood, your word. When you needed help, I gave it to you," said John, making Sophia remember that fact, so she resignedly lowered her gun. "Sit," the woman proclaimed seriously, to which her dogs obeyed her command. "I was referring to you," John said, Sophia without changing her hostile behavior towards the aforementioned, going to sit down just like the murderer. "You know I'm the manager now, right?" she said as she sat down on the couch and crossed her legs, while John had barely sat down, in addition to having both canines in front of him. "I'm not on duty anymore, John. So unlike you, I don't go around killing people," Sophia said with a serious tone looking at the brunette. "I'm not asking you to kill anyone, Sophia. I just want you to take me to your old boss," John communicated neutrally, making Sophia nod repeatedly. "You want to kill Barada?" Sophia said, surprised, thinking that could be the reason why John was in Casablanca. "I'm not going to kill him, I just want to talk to him," John clarified, so there would be no misunderstandings. "But what can he offer you?" asked Sophia a little confused. The guide answered the brown-haired boy, not wanting to beat around the bush. "Listen. I made a deal when I agreed to manage this hotel, and that deal said that I had to obey the rules of the Supreme Order. If you don't kill him, he will kill you, and quite possibly me too for taking you there," Sophia said seriously, knowing Barada's loyalty to those in high command. "And if I make a single mistake, if I make an enemy, maybe someone will come looking for my daughter," Sophia continued speaking, to which John just looked down. "I know what you did to rescue her, John. But I'm not going to take that risk." "I'm sorry," Sophia finished speaking, without receiving a single word from her former friend, until. "Do you want to know where she is?" asked the brown-haired boy, directing his gaze towards the manager, still knowing the girl's location. "No. I don't want to ever know, because I know I'll go looking for her," he said in a serious tone, but without being able to avoid it, his eyes became teary at John's words. "The part of me wants to see her, and I have to kill that part of me every day just to protect her. Because sometimes you have to kill what you love." Sophia kept talking, but with each word she said her voice was breaking, and at any moment it seemed like she was going to break into tears. "That's why I ask you for the favor. That's why I'm sitting here now. And that's why I'm bucked up," Sophia said in a small burst of anger, while John looked at the card in his hand and then at the ring with red touches that he had on his left ring finger. "Consequences," John commented, knowing where his actions had led him. "Yes, consequences." Sophia understood the murderer's words like no other she had heard before. "I just ask you to try. This way, you and I will be even," the brunette requested, placing the token on the glass table that was between him and Sophia, moving the object towards the aforementioned table, and then sitting down again. "No. After this, we'll be even," Sophia said in a serious tone, handing the token back to John. "We leave in 10 minutes," said Sophia, leaving the room to change, while John stared at the 2 canines in front of him. At the Continental, Tokyo. Even though it was 2 a.m. and a heavy rain was lashing all over Tokyo, Winston was awake and sitting in a place at the Continental bar, drinking a simple glass of whiskey with ice. Although he heard some footsteps approaching him, he raised his head, observing that it was Izumi. "Can't sleep, Miss Izumi?" asked a temporary manager looking at the brunette. "You don't seem to be able to do it either, Mr. Winston. May I?" Izumi commented, finally asking Winston if she could sit down, receiving a nod from him. Did you think about the proposal I made you? Winston asked curiously, remembering the conversation he had with the woman in front of him. Yes, I'll try, Izumi answered with a somewhat determined tone, but inside she had her doubts about whether to do it or not. Don't worry, everything will be fine, the temporary manager commented confidently, taking a sip of his drink. What about you? Izumi asked, referring to Winston's replacement, something he communicated to everyone several hours ago. I've thought about it enough, and the truth is it's time for me to leave all this and live the normal life I never had, Winston answered without much delay. I'm envious of his optimism, Izumi commented sincerely, not knowing how the man she was looking at could continue to be so positive despite having worked for more than 3 decades and in the end being replaced as if nothing had happened. It's not optimism, Miss Izumi. It's just the dream of an old man who's been sitting in the same chair and drinking the same liquor for many years, Winston said with a small smile, knowing he had to either choose that or death. Even with that out of the way, it didn't change the fact that Izumi admired Winston's positivity, and not only that, she also felt very good around him. However, Charon appeared, catching the attention of both adults. Excuse me, sir. But there is something that concerns you, Charon informed without abandoning his polite tone, missing both Izumi and Winston. In a change of scene, Winston arrived with Sharon to a security room full of monitors, which were watched by a single guard of possibly 28 years of age, with wavy black hair that covered a large part of his forehead and with a white stripe on the right side. His attire consisted of an elegant suit like all the guards, but unlike them, this one had his nails painted black. Show me what you have, Tao ordered the temporary hotel manager, once near the aforementioned. Right away, sir, the guard complied without any hint of hesitation, playing a recording from the crematorium. Putting on his glasses to see the video better, once it was done, Winston saw how a woman in a long brown coat and a maroon suit approached Santino's corpse, beginning to caress his face. What are you doing here, woman? Asked Winston with a serious tone when he recognized that person. Somewhere in Tokyo. Parking in the middle of the street, a taxi stopped and the adjudicator got out, but not before opening an umbrella. Once outside, the woman closed the door of the vehicle and the driver then set off. On the other side, the order's envoy began to walk towards a small Japanese restaurant where she could see 3 men working in a relaxed manner. By the time she was under the roof of the food stand, the adjudicator took a seat and left her raincoat on a seat to her right. Tell me, the 3 cooks exclaimed happily at the presence of the woman. Welcome. The 53-year-old man with a bandana on his shaved head and wearing a dark blue kimono with dandelion prints on it approached a cat lying at one end of the counter and handed it a piece of fish, which the feline happily began to consume. The cook commented in a soft tone, with a small smile on his face. Yes, you're welcome. Now focusing on his client, the chef placed a small wooden board along with a piece of sushi in front of the adjudicator. How can I help you? Asked the cook with a smile, but the high table agent didn't say anything and just placed a badge on the counter. Something that the cook recognized, and in an instant, the smile on his face disappeared. It must be you, Zero, right? Asked the adjudicator, not believing that the animated man in front of her could be the one she was looking for. I didn't expect a supreme order so soon, Zero answered, which was enough for the adjudicator to confirm her suspicions. And despite the latter's presence, that didn't stop Zero from continuing with his work. There is a mission, it involves someone who broke the rules and is currently defying the order, the adjudicator reported, watching as Zero cut up a pufferfish. I assume you mean John Wick. My students have been looking for him, Zero said, referring to the 2 men working with him. John Wick and all those who helped him, declared the adjudicator seriously, looking at Zero. You must have heard stories about him, the most recent being that he killed. The adjudicator could not continue speaking when she was interrupted by the cook and murderer. Santino D'Antonio. I know. I'm aware of it and I'm interested, Zero commented as he stopped cutting the fish and stood face to face with the order's envoy. A lot, the cook finished speaking with great emotion, then grabbed a piece of puffer fish and cut it with a pair of chopsticks. Puffer fish, very poisonous, Zero warned, placing the raw fish on the adjudicator's plate. No soy, Zero informed, but the adjudicator didn't care, and with her right hand, she grabbed the piece of fish and without even hesitating, she put it directly into her mouth. I have served and I will serve again, Zero said respectfully at the adjudicator's action, making a slight reference to something that his 2 pupils also did. While the high table's envoy returned the gesture, then grabbed her badge and umbrella, proceeding to leave the place. But halfway there, the adjudicator felt her cell phone vibrate, so she pulled it out of her coat, seeing that it was a message from Winston, who had sent her a photo of Alessandro D'Antonio in the Continental Crematorium. He had an idea of what she could do at the hotel. On the other hand, once he saw the adjudicator leave, Zero raised his head with an expression that showed pure excitement, like that of a child who was about to be bought a new toy. Scene change. But now, in the director's theater, she sat watching her students dance on stage to opera music. While they were doing that, the woman wrote down what she could change to improve the act. Stop, the director exclaimed, ordered to her students, while the adjudicator stood in front of her, whom she recognized in a second. Get out, he ordered again, at which point all the dancers left the platform. In a small scene change, the headmistress was sitting on the platform, surrounded by Zero, along with the same pupils as before, and the adjudicator. The Supreme Order and the Ruskaroma have an agreement, declared the director, in an attempt to get rid of the adjudicator. Yes, but you help John Wick, said the Order's envoy, to which the director cursed the brown-haired man in her mind. He had a reservation, the older woman excused herself in an attempt to not want trouble. Which is not more important than the Order. Your penance will be paid with blood, said the adjudicator seriously, but knowing that the person in charge of the Ruskaroma managed a similar system to the Order, she decided not to be so hard on her. Now, extend your hands and swear allegiance, the adjudicator requested, or rather ordered, to which the director did as requested and stood up from her seat looking at the woman in front of her. I have served and I will be of service, the director declared firmly, and before she knew it, Zero pierced her hands with a wakizashi. After that, he withdrew his sword. Enduring the pain that came with that, the director's hands were bleeding as the adjudicator stepped closer to her to see if her word was carried out. With that done, the high table's envoy along with the assassin she hired proceeded to leave, leaving the director to sit in her seat staring at her hands. Back to the continental Morocco. After a few minutes, Sophia was wearing a different outfit than before and had her hair in a ponytail, reloading a Glock 17 while approaching one of her dogs that were with John. There's no need for that, Sophia. It'll just be a conversation, said the brown-haired boy confidently, while Sophia crouched down until she was at her dog's height. John, with you it's never just a conversation, the manager commented seriously, hiding the gun in the armored vest her pet was wearing. Let's go, Sophia ordered both John and her dogs to begin their journey. In another scene change, Sophia, John and the dogs arrived at a kind of foundry where all the workers were watched by armed Moroccans, two of whom stopped the manager of the Continental and the murderer. They began to inspect them to see if they were carrying a weapon. Sophia exclaimed with joy, a voice that recognized the aforementioned one. Who turned his gaze towards a 56-year-old man with blonde hair as well as his beard. It's always a pleasure to see you, and the dogs, of course, how wonderful, said the man happily, without a hint of falsehood in his words. Mr. Barada, the manager greeted, while her former boss approached her and John. If there is no problem, can I pet one? Asked Barada, pointing to both dogs once he was close. Of course, answered Sophia simply, knowing that her dog would not hurt anyone unless she wanted it to. Yours. Sophia spoke to the canine on her left. Jazzer, go. Fantastic, said Barada, bending down to pet Sophia's pet, but without stopping his thing, he looked at John, who remained silent. Jonathan Wick. I knew he had reached our shores, Barada continued talking, and at one point he stopped petting Jazzer, proceeding to get up and approach the assassin. Come in. There's a lot to talk about, said Barada in a friendly manner, starting to walk, followed by his unexpected guests. I must say I'm curious. What brought you to my domain? Asked Barada as he walked with John at his side. Come on, be honest. Did you come to kill me? Asked Barada again, this time looking at the brown-haired boy. No, John answered directly. Even so, Barada trusted the words of the Baba Yaga. Entering a place accompanied by the aforementioned Sophia and his pets. Mr. Wick, do you know where the word assassin comes from? Barada asked as his guests entered what appeared to be a terrace, or, rather, an open-air lounge. This was because there was no roof in the place. Apart from that, the decoration was quite exotic, with vases with contents that few would know their contents, flower pots, a desk with things on top, and behind this, the most striking thing, two separate latrines in which one had a coin and in the other a token. Speaking of the latter, two men at each end of the room were managing the same coins and tokens that were in the latrines and those used by the murderers. There were also several Moroccan guards present. People say it comes from Hashishin. Disciples of Hassan I Saba, said Barada while pouring whiskey into two small glasses, leaving aside the meaning of that word. There is the fact that those assassins, instead of killing for money or revenge, did it for political reasons, finished the former manager, approaching Sophia and John and handing them the glass of whiskey he poured. NT. Hashishin means consumers of hashish, which is a product obtained from cannabis from its resin or pollen. No, thank you, Sophia refused the drink, unlike John, who did accept the glass. While Barada kept his former student's glass. But on the other hand, they say it comes from Asesino, which means men who are faithful and obey their beliefs, Barada commented, and then pointed towards one of the latrines with a glass of whiskey in hand. Do you see that coin? That is the first coin minted in this place. Next to it is the first token, Barada finished saying, pointing this time to the other latrine. It wasn't easy to locate them, believe me. Although that coin, of course, doesn't represent a monetary value. Rather, it represents the trade of relationships, a social contract in which they agree to participate. Order and rules, said Barada as he approached John until he stood in front of him. You broke the rules. The Supreme Order wants you dead. Why would they allow you to walk away alive when your own actions put them at risk? He said. Ask no one in particular, and knowing he had no choice, John got down on his knees, but not before leaving the glass of undrunk whiskey on the floor. I want to make amends to pay for what I did. I request a meeting with who is above the order, the brown-haired boy confessed, keeping his gaze down. On the other hand, Barada approached Jazzer to just caress him again. This dog, I love him, Barada commented with a smile. Tell me, does he shed a lot of hair? Asked the former manager, looking at the current one. Sometimes, Sophia answered, somewhat confused by Barada's question. When I leave, tell the regent that I will come. And if he wants me dead, he will let his bones dry in the sun. And I will have given him the option. Barada cut off the murderer's speech, approaching a box and opening it, taking out a cigar from there. I'm very sorry, Mr. Wick. I can't tell you where or how to locate the regent, Barada said with some pity, sitting down in the chair that was on the other side of the desk, while John grabbed the glass and stood up with resignation. You don't seem to understand that you won't be looking for the regent. Unless he decides to find you, Barada explained, John looking at him. Do you still have the goal of talking to him? Then go to the Sahara Desert and look up Canis Minor, the dog that followed Orion across the sky. Follow the brightest star, walk until he is almost dead, then keep walking. When he is about to breathe his last breath, he will find you or not. Barada recounted almost indifferently. After all, he was confident that John would die in the desert. I appreciate it, John commented, leaving the glass on a nearby table, while Barada prepared to light his cigarette. Thank you, sir, Sophia said after a long while, taking the path with John and their dogs to leave. However, maybe they didn't pay attention to me, said Barada, stopping his two guests, who turned to look at him. The social contract, the commerce of relationships. You received a great gift. I welcomed your friend. What do you offer in return? Asked Barada to Sophia, at the same time that he approached Jazzer, bending down to pet him. So gentle and yet so aggressive. I love this dog, she said, playing with Sophia's pet. I'm going to keep him, she said without hesitation, praising the current manager. Excuse me? Asked Sophia, surprised and somewhat angry at her former boss's words. He will be my gift. With this you will prove your loyalty to me, said Barada in an attempt to convince Sophia. No, said the aforementioned, shaking her head. It's the least you can do, Barada commented, standing up. No, you can't keep my dog, Sophia continued to refuse despite the consequences she could face. Okay, said Barada in a disappointed manner and approaching the same box from where he took out the cigar, but this time, he took out a gun. Then I will kill him, declared Barada, aiming at Jazzer and shooting him without even hesitating. A screech was heard from the canine, and quickly, Sophia went to his aid. I'm sorry, Sophia was talking to her dog, worried that the bullet had hit a vital point of her pet. Small, resist. I'm sorry, Sophia, but that was so you could learn, said the former manager sadly, while Sophia checked her dog for a wound, which she ended up finding with the bullet in the vest her pet was wearing. No, John whispered when he saw the bullet Sophia had. One standing, Sophia grabbed her gun and approached Barada, aiming at his head. Sophia, don't do it, said John, stopping her before she pulled the trigger, although, in the end, Sophia ended up shooting Barada in his right leg, eliciting a grunt of pain from her former boss. He shot my dog, Sophia said angrily, holding back the urge to kill Barada. I understand you, John said, knowing that deep down he also wanted to kill whoever shot his puppy. It's time to go, said Sophia once she was calm, proceeding to leave the room with John and her pets, leaving a Barada who was dying of pain. After finishing killing the last remaining Moroccan, both John and Sophia looked around for any more assassins, and although no one arrived in the next few seconds, they decided to get into one of the 4x4 trucks to leave their current location. Oh, Sophia exclaimed towards her dogs, while banging on the car door. Above. Getting out of the vehicle and into her owner's car through the open windows, once both dogs were in, Sophia hit the gas heading towards the Moroccan desert so that John could meet the regent. Sahara Desert, Morocco. After driving for several hours and arriving at the desert, the driest area in the world, Sophia stopped the 4x4 vehicle so that she and the murderer could get out. On the other hand, the manager took care of her pets. On the other, John observed the desert carefully. You're going to die, John, Sophia spoke from behind him, to which he turned to look at her. Here in the desert or somewhere along the road. You're going to die, Sophia continued speaking, knowing that the chances of John being taken care of by the regent were very low. Without saying a single word, John pulled the token out of his suit and opened it, proceeding to prick his thumb with the tip of the device, after which he placed his bloody finger next to Sophia's fingerprint. Consequences, said the Baba Yaga, closing and handing the card to the manager. Consequences, said Sophia, receiving the card and ready to give the murderer the bottle with a little water. There was something that the latter was not going to deny. However, Sophia pushed the bottle away and without hesitation began to drink the liquid until the container was empty. And as if that were not enough, the former assassin stirred the little water she had in her mouth, then spit it into the mouth of the bottle, only a few drops getting in, as the rest fell to the ground. Here. It's time for you to get going, Sophia advised as she gave the bottle to John, being received by him. Sophia. John said goodbye to the aforementioned with that and a nod, setting off on a journey in search of his salvation. While Sophia got into the vehicle with her pets, leaving the desert. Moving forward. Walking on top of a sand mountain under the sunset. Day and night without stopping. Walking, but now in the night. John stopped for a few moments to look at the sky and search for the brightest star. However, at one point. After walking for more than 3 days with almost no rest, hungry and thirsty, John collapsed on the sand, with no sign of anyone nearby to save him. Soup Kitchen, New York. Back at the Bowery King's Operations Center. The aforementioned was sitting in his office, thinking what kind of move he could make as a declaration of war towards those of the high table, or let them make the first move, so that he would have a reason to fight back, plus thanks to that he could get allies who want to confront the higher echelons of the criminal world. But interrupting his boss's thoughts, a beggar entered the room and approached him with the same cell phone from several days ago. Sir. The adjudicator wants to speak with you, said the vagabond, to which the king took the phone and waited for his employee to leave. How can I help you now, adjudicator? Asked the king with falsehood in his words, given that he would not help her in a million years. Do you know something? I focused so much on you and your throne that I had forgotten about those who helped John Wick in his entirety, commented the adjudicator, leaving the king of the neighborhoods confused. Sir, said a male voice on the other end of the phone, being recognized by the king. But before he said anything, the king heard how Earl seemed to be drowning, and then he no longer heard his voice. It is no longer necessary for you to abandon your throne, but from now on, the territory that you manage in Tokyo is now property of the Supreme Order. If you have any complaints, call this number and do me the favor of preparing an in-person meeting, informed the high table agent, and cutting off the call, making the king slam the cell phone against a wall out of rage. In the Sahara Desert. Walking through the desert accompanied by a camel, a Moroccan in the distance saw John's body on the ground, so without hesitation he headed towards him. In a scene change, a still passed out John was on the camel's back, while the Moroccan was leading the latter to a small camp. At which, once he arrived, a bunch of Moroccans were watching him, but the latter didn't care and just got John off the animal in a delicate way. In another scene change, John slowly opened his eyes, while in front of the brown-haired man was the same Moroccan who rescued him. But sitting on a kind of throne, a 46-year-old man wearing Moroccan clothes watched the killer wake up. Baby, said the man sitting on the throne on the other side, a half-bewildered John checked if he still had his weapon. Your gun is still on your waist. I suggest you drink, advised the same man from before, to which John realized that what he said was true. He proceeded to grab the small glass of water that was in front of him. My son, how did you get so lost? Asked the man curiously, after John had drunk and left the glass on the floor. I'm not. I've been looking for you, Mr. Regent, the brown-haired boy responded respectfully to the one who stood above the high table. I'm not talking about your location. This is the first time I've seen a man fight so hard to get back to where he started, the regent commented as he stood up from his seat and walked towards John, crouching down in front of him. So tell me, Jonathan, what for or why do you want to live? Asked with intrigue the one who is above all. To settle my accounts with the people who helped me even though I became an excommunicated. And not only them, but also those I met when I was on duty. I owe them a lot, John answered with his greatest sincerity. After all, if it hadn't been for those people and their advice I wouldn't be alive now. Do you want to live like a man of your word? Asked the regent, somewhat surprised by the brown-haired man's response. Yes, John declared firmly, and a strong gleam of will in his eyes. Okay, I'll give you the chance to keep living. But it will be a more complicated life, warned the regent, looking at the brown-haired boy. Complete a task for us, and your excommunication will be revoked. The open contract will be closed and you will continue living before you became an excommunicated, with the difference that now you will be tied to the order and you will do what you do best for the rest of your life, continued speaking the one who is above all, proceeding to get up and go to his throne. The choice is yours. Die here and now, or live on to pay your debts, said the regent as he sat down, and as he had no choice, John got up from the ground with some difficulty. I will. But I need another job, one that leaves Sophia Al-Azwar unpunished for what she did, the brunette requested, once standing, looking at the regent. Very well. The cost of 2 lives is the death of 2. I murdered Alessandra D'Antonio and the manager of the Tokyo Continental, Winston ordered the one above everything, surprising the brown-haired boy. What? Asked John, thinking he heard wrong. Both of you are forgetting your loyalty. The open contract, excommunication, and Miss Alswor's shares will not be revoked until you complete the mission warn the region, but don't worry, both of you are in the Tokyo Continental and are forbidden to leave there. So you have 48 hours to complete the job, informed the regent seriously. Well, John did not know whether to do his job or not. Until it was decided. I was on duty and I will always be on duty, declared the brown-haired boy as he knelt in front of the one who is above all. Very well, my son. Put aside your weakness and reaffirm your loyalty to the order, said the regent as two men placed a small table in front of John. The murderer, looking better at the furniture, saw that there was a hammer and a spatula on top of it, although he kept his eyes on the last tool and then turned his gaze towards the regent. Mr. John Wick, your honor, the regent requested, to which John understood what he meant. Show me your loyalty. Placing his left hand in the center of the table, the murderer looked at the one who was above everything for a few seconds, then quickly grabbed the spatula and cut off his left ring finger, where the ring he always carried with him was. John accidentally let out a groan of pain as he did so and dropped the tool to the side of him, proceeding to grab his severed finger and pull the ring off of it, which he handed to the regent who was now in front of him. I didn't know you were engaged, Jonathan, the regent commented as he carefully examined the ring. It's something from my past. But I don't need it now. Not anymore, said the brown-haired boy, holding back the pain he felt, remembering where he got that ring from. Several years ago. This is John stopped speaking, seeing what was in front of him. We found it in the uniform you were wearing, Winston said, showing the brown-haired boy 15 rings, each one with a different gem as decoration, unlike one. If you want, I can throw them away, the manager commented, but without saying anything, John grabbed 2 rings, one decorated with a very shiny ruby and the other that had nothing, just something carved on the back that said, I will love them for life. I'll keep them, said John decisively, bringing both rings together in one hand to close it, beginning to apply magic to them. Are you sure? Asked Winston, looking doubtfully at John for his words and action. Yes. These rings will be a memory of my old life, the brown-haired boy answered, opening his hand, revealing how both rings became one, with the difference that the ruby surrounded certain parts of the ring, giving a reddish detail. I'll get rid of them myself when I know I'm over that life, declared the brown-haired boy, placing the ring on his left ring finger, fitting it perfectly. In the present. I accept your offering and your fidelity, said the regent, returning to his seat and looking at John's ring for a few seconds, then putting it away among his clothes. Meanwhile, the Moroccan who saved John from the desert approached him with a red-hot metal bar at the tip, so the brown-haired man put his lost finger there to cauterize it, something that caused him tremendous pain. I wish you good luck on your journey. Zahir will help you prepare for your departure, the regent spoke to John, who was getting up from the ground, and then began to follow the Moroccan. And Mr. Wick, the regent, stopped the aforementioned, who only turned to look at him, as did Zahiri 1K, 9HC, the regent finished saying, without receiving a word from the assassin, who left the tent following Zahir. Changing the scene, the Moroccan led John to a tent where there was a tub filled with hot water and 2 buckets of cold water nearby. The brunette, however, focused on the suit hanging there along with a belt and a pair of shoes. After several minutes, John finished his task and left the tent, going in search of Zahir to tell him where he should go to get out of the desert. But in the middle of his search, he heard a female voice coming from behind. Jonathan, the female voice called the aforementioned, to which he turned to see who it was. She was a 29-year-old woman with long brown hair and violet eyes. Her outfit consisted of a military uniform, something unusual coming from a Moroccan. She also carried a sword stored in its sheath on the left side of her hip. Zafira, the brown-haired boy, greeted once the woman was close to him. So you already talked to the regent, Zafira commented, noticing which finger John was missing. Yes. Your father was very kind, said the brown-haired boy, making the brunette smile a little. After all, she must have received the information from someone about where she could find him. Although you could have been more specific about how I could find it, John complained in a complaining manner, making the woman change her happy smile to an annoyed one. Even though I gave you valuable information. This is how you pay me back, Zafira said in an annoyed manner, holding the hilt of her sword. Zahir spoke, preventing both adults from starting to fight. Mr. Wick. Preparations for your departure are ready. So I go away. You have work to do, Zafira commented, dropping her weapon and calming down. Zafira, John said goodbye to the regent's daughter, receiving a nod as a farewell from the brunette. However. Good luck, Zafira whispered in John's ear, taking him by surprise as he turned around. Watching the brunette give him a radiant smile, without knowing why, something that disconcerted him in a certain way. But not wanting to make Zahir wait any longer, Jonathan began to follow him out of the camp. As he walked away, John became more and more willing to do his job, even if it meant killing the man who saved him from death several years ago. Chapter 7. Excommunicated Part 3. Authors Pav. On a small balcony, Izumi stood alone, looking out over the city of Tokyo with a certain melancholy in her eyes. With a heavy heart, the former hyodou looked up at the clear night sky, focusing on the waning moon that lay there above. Letting out a discouraged sigh, Izumi proceeded to enter her room as the cold breeze began to affect her. Once inside, the brunette sat on the bed with a blank look, not knowing what to do, both metaphorically and literally. She always dreamed that one day she would meet her son again, and she even prepared herself in case that ever happened. But such preparations were useless. The burden she felt, accompanied by a great feeling of guilt, overwhelmed her completely, making her unable to think straight. Besides, her son was no longer that optimistic young man, he was now a full-fledged adult who did not need anyone by his side. Knock knock. Izumi, are you awake? Goro asked, standing on the other side of the door and having been the one responsible for knocking on it, bringing his ex-wife back to her senses. What do you want, Goro? Izumi returned the question somewhat arrogantly, sitting up from the bed, without even bothering to get up. Let's talk more calmly, Izumi. There are guests trying to get some sleep, Goro stated with some eloquence, to which Izumi gritted her teeth at having to agree with her ex-husband. Come on, Izumi. It will be quick, I assure you, Mr. Hyodou expressed with total confidence in his tone, and since he knew him quite well, Izumi was aware that Goro would be willing to wait an eternity standing there until he opened the door. With total resignation, Izumi got up from the bed and quickly walked towards the entrance, immediately removing the lock and then opening the door. Finding herself not only with Goro, but also with Riaz, who upon seeing her, Izumi without even hesitating tried to close the door, but the hyodou patriarch was faster and placed his foot on the frame, preventing her from closing it. Mother, he's going to. Riaz couldn't continue speaking when she was interrupted by Izumi. Don't call me that, Izumi growled with total anger, causing Riaz to be unable to articulate any words and just look at the ground somewhat embarrassed. And you, Izumi commented, fixing her eyes full of rage on her ex-husband, take your foot out of the door or I'll break it, the brunette warned with venom and firmness in both her words and her eyes, yet Goro remained indifferent to Izumi's words. It's fast, Izumi. Less than 5 minutes, Goro assured in a calm tone with his hands raised in a sign of peace, while at the same time removing his foot. Izumi expressed a bit annoyed knowing that she was only going to waste her time, anyway, she could close the door the moment something didn't please her. Talk, the brunette said seriously, wanting to end this matter as soon as possible. It's about Issei. The girls and I have come up with a plan to. Goro was cut off from his speech after witnessing Izumi slam the door in his face, even hearing her place the lock so they couldn't open the entrance. Izumi, wait. Goro was unable to speak when he was interrupted again by his ex. I don't want to hear anything else, Izumi declared with anger in her voice as she walked away from the door. But Riaz tried to say something, which was useless since Izumi cut her off. But nothing. You know very well that that is impossible, Izumi commented, aware that her son would never return to those who stabbed him in the back, he would choose to go to Hades rather than do that. Not for you, Goro declared, causing a huge silence to remain and causing Izumi to be both confused and thoughtful by Mr. Hyodou's words. You may not have been the best mother. Goro couldn't continue speaking because Izumi intervened in his chatter. The donkey talking about ears, Izumi expressed sarcastically, since Goro was worse than her in terms of the treatment they gave to Issei. Still, you were closer to him than me. I even dare say closer than the girls, but the thing is that possibly, very possibly, you can make Issei come back, Goro expressed with total certainty in his words, so much so that he would bet his entire fortune on it. Silence reigned, Izumi did not say a word and gave no signs of moving, both Goro and Riaz anxiously awaited an answer, and for that answer to be a yes. Their time is up, Izumi declared seriously, much to the dismay of Riaz, but not of Patriarch Hyodou. Okay. We won't go, Goro said calmly to Riaz's surprise, who turned to look at him. At that, Goro placed his hand on the Grimory's shoulder, while giving her a smile still. Think about it carefully, Izumi commented, the Hyodou patriarch, who began to retreat while being followed by the Grimory, who understood the reason for her still father-in-law's attitude. On Izumi's side, the aforementioned had remained seated in the middle of the hallway, while her back was leaning against the wall. Her emotions and thoughts were in complete chaos, so much so that she questioned whether or not to accept her ex-husband's proposal. Change of scene. In a small living room where everything would be dark if it weren't for the lit fireplace, the adjudicator was sitting on a single sofa, while in front of her was the woman who was captured by the cameras in the hotel's funeral home. Both women remained silent, one side of their faces shining from the glow emitted by the fireplace, while the crackling of the burning wood could be heard. I understand, the adjudicator expressed calmly, looking away, but quickly fixed her eyes on the woman. I suppose you don't mind the consequences of killing John Wick on the Continental, Miss Samantha? The order's envoy questioned, leaning forward a little. As long as my husband's killer is dead, I can't care about anything else, Samantha declared with a serious tone, being more than willing to end John Wick's life herself. "If that is your wish, then I will not stop you," the adjudicator stated indifferently, settling into her seat, watching as Samantha got up from the couch. "Don't worry, I assumed it from the beginning," Samantha commented calmly once she was standing. "After all, what could I expect from you, even though you let the open contract go by," D'Antonio said, carefully observing the adjudicator, who remained impassive in her seat. "With your permission, I'm leaving," Samantha declared, proceeding to leave the room of the Supreme Order's envoy. By the time Samantha left the adjudicator's house, the aforementioned stood up from her seat looking somewhat annoyed, pacing from one place to another thinking about her next move. Until her eyes fixed on the fireplace, more specifically on the fire, nodding her head having made a decision. Train station, Tokyo. In the underground station, a train was slowly slowing down until it finally stopped. After that, the doors opened automatically, and in one of the cars was John Wick, who wasted no time and got off the train. Walking through the subway tunnels, John kept his gaze fixed forward and was fully alert in case he was attacked from behind. But when he noticed a certain murderous instinct coming from ahead of him, he could see a man and a woman walking in his direction. Without even hesitating, John walked towards them, speeding up his pace a little. However, both individuals opened their jackets in order to draw their weapons. At that, John stopped, not having any idea of what to do since he was surrounded mostly by civilians. However, before they could draw their weapons, the woman was stabbed by a man who passed by her. Upon realizing what had happened, the man who was with her turned around to see her, but he was stabbed in the neck, followed by another stab in the abdomen by two different people. As for the woman, she was held from behind, while a knife was placed at the back of her neck. Meanwhile, two men stood in the middle to stab both companions one last time, being taken away as if nothing had happened by the people who stabbed them previously. Even though there were dozens of people around, none of them reacted to that. In fact, it seemed as if they had ignored the fact. John, on the other hand, only carefully observed the three assassins in front of him until one of them pointed behind him with a bloody knife in his hand as a sign that he would continue on his way. Understanding the message, John set off, passing through the assassins who stepped aside to allow him to continue on his way. Without letting his guard down for the rest of the journey, John reached the main hall of the terminal, accompanied by the assassins who were standing a few meters away. John continued to advance until he could feel a killer instinct combined with an enormous thirst for blood in the distance. Focusing his sight on the balcony, John spotted Zero, who, realizing that he was under the gaze of one of the most dangerous assassins, did not hesitate for a second and proceeded to climb down from the balcony using the steps nearby. Witnessing this, John quickened his pace towards Zero, who had just come down the stairs when he ran into a man, but he didn't care and continued on his way. Almost halfway down the stairs, Zero pulled out a knife, something John did as well, not wanting to take any risks. Unconsciously, both assassins emanated a certain dangerous aura that alerted the people who were present, feeling such a powerful tension that combined with their nerves, made them move away, leaving more than enough space for Zero and John to fight at ease. But just as they were only a couple of meters away, John turned his head to the right. At first he didn't pay attention to it, but upon seeing it a second time he immediately stopped walking, something that Zero didn't do. And before the ninja assassin could do anything, a woman stood in the way and prevented him from continuing to advance due to the long line of children accompanying her. "Don't separate children, hold hands very tightly," said the woman with a certain authoritarian tone mixed with kindness, while she was followed by elementary school children. "See? That's why you're special," John Wick Zero expressed with joy in his tone of voice, while John looked at the children for a few seconds. After that, he focused on his enemy. "I wouldn't have stopped," the ninja assassin stated nonchalantly, holding his knife firmly. "It's good that you're back," Zero said with pleasure while a few people walked past both assassins, but at the end, a man appeared behind Zero, alerting John a little. "How was your trip? Are you heading to the Continental?" Zero asked with false curiosity, being more than aware of John's movements, who ignored Zero when he realized that the man who had disappeared was now in his rear. John turned his focus back to Zero, but in one swift movement, John slit the neck of the assassin behind him, positioning himself to one side of him to hold him and stab him in the center of the chest and on the side of his head, all under Zero's watchful eye, while the civilians continued on their way without paying attention to what was happening. "Is he with you?" John asked seriously, holding the dead man, something that didn't worry Zero at all. "I was," Zero answered indifferently as he watched John drop his student's body. John stared at Zero until a group of people walked through the middle, and although that lasted for an instant, it was enough for the brunette to disappear without a trace. Surprising and confusing the ninja assassin, who proceeded to look in different directions in search of his target, completely ignoring the body of his student lying on the ground. "Nice trick," Zero expressed excitedly as he pulled out a cell phone from his jacket pocket, sending a message that said, "It's coming out on the north side in the parking lot." In a slight scene change, with John, the aforementioned was calmly leaving the station through the back. until he could hear the sound of two motorcycles approaching his position, to which he quickened his pace, and once he was outside a motorcyclist was just stopping. John didn't hesitate for a second though, and lunged at the biker before he could fully stop. They both fell hard to the ground, but when he saw another biker approaching, he quickly got up and threw himself at him, holding him tightly by the shoulders, causing the two of them to fall together to the concrete floor. Despite the pain he was feeling, John wasted no time and took off the helmet of the last rider he knocked down, hitting him with the protection a couple of times on the head. As for the other driver, he was a bit stunned by what had happened, but as he stood up he pulled out a Walther CCP, but before he could do anything, John threw the helmet at his head, causing him to shoot at the ground. Approaching the man with the gun, John grabbed his arm, and the biker let out a couple more shots. His resistance didn't last long either, as John was able to easily take the gun away from him, and without having to see, he shot him in the abdomen. After that, John turned around and aimed at his head, shooting through the glass of the helmet the driver was wearing. Not forgetting the one who was left, John shot the one on the ground twice in the head. After that, he put the gun in his waist and picked up the nearest motorcycle, getting on the vehicle, started it and accelerated a little. However, a feeling made him look back, seeing how Zero was about to leave the terminal, so he decided to head off once and for all. Zero, on his side, watching John leave, grabbed and put on his healthy helmet that was on the ground. Following that, he proceeded to pick up the turned-on motorcycle that was lying on the ground. And just as three motorcyclists arrived at the scene, Zero got on the motorcycle and rode in front while being followed by his students. It didn't take long for Zero and his men to catch up with John, and two more bikers had even joined the chase. John, on his part, realizing this, decided to deviate from his main path, leading his pursuers towards a bridge that, according to several signs, said, "Bridge closed." Rising from the ground with slight difficulty, one standing, Zero took off his helmet and proceeded to approach John while opening his jacket to take out a pistol. Meanwhile, John remained on the ground somewhat disoriented. Likewise, he saw how his enemy approached with a Walther CCP, and since he was aware that he could not do anything, he quickly extended his hand touching the last step of the Continental, at the same time that Zero pointed the pistol at him. "Sir," Charon called in a firm voice from the entrance of the Continental, being observed by both Zero and John. "Lower your weapon right now," the janitor ordered in an authoritative tone, without taking his eyes off the assassin. "He's an excommunicated," Zero declared seriously while still pointing his gun at John. "Unless you want to become one," Charon spoke as he walked down a couple of steps. "I suggest you lower your gun right now," Charon threatened, while Zero remained silent for a few seconds, until he decided to lower his gun. "I would like to see the manager," John requested somewhat calmly, watching as Charon buttoned a button on his suit. "Of course. If you would be so kind as to follow me," Charon stated with a slight smile, to which Zero turned around with an expression that denoted surprise mixed with indignation. In a change of scene, Zero and John arrived at a small, well-furnished balcony, the most striking being two individual armchairs and a three-seater sofa. But back to the subject, Charon, who was in front of both assassins, only limited himself to extending his hand towards the armchairs. "Please take a seat. I'll let him know you've arrived," Charon said cordially, to which John went to sit on the far left of the large sofa. Without saying a single word, Charon left the room under Zero's gaze, who upon confirming that the janitor left, slowly walked towards where John was sitting and without even hesitating, took a seat next to the brunette, who looked at him uncomfortably before getting up and sitting in the individual armchair nearby. Zero kept his gaze fixed forward. Even so, he glanced at John out of the corner of his eye until, unable to bear it any longer, he glanced towards the entrance. And when he realized that no one was approaching, he decided to move to the end of the sofa in order to close the distance with the brunette. "I must tell you that I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. I'm a fan." John Wick, Zero expressed with great emotion, so much so that he let out a light sigh accompanied by a light laugh. "And so far you haven't disappointed me," Zero declared with total fanaticism, running out of words, but he quickly turned his gaze back, hearing something or someone approaching. As he did so, he saw that it was a puppy that was heading quickly towards John, jumping on top of him and starting to lick his face. Something that John tried to avoid, while Zero watched the scene with a smile. "The famous puppy. I see that she likes you," Zero commented without erasing his smile at the same time that the puppy continued licking her owner's face. "The truth is, I like cats more, personally," the ninja assassin said sentimentally, remembering his pet. "Hello, little one," John greeted with some difficulty given that the canine kept licking his face. Calm down, the brown-haired boy said, caressing his faithful pet so that it would calm down. "We're the same, you know. We both got the same gift," Zero stated seriously, looking at John, who returned his gaze. "No. We're not," John replied with confidence in his words, deciding to focus more on his puppy than on Zero. Yeah, John said it to his pet in a soft tone, which finally calmed her down. Mr. Wick, Sharon called as he barely entered the room, getting the attention of both assassins. "The manager is waiting for you in the administrative room," the janitor notified, to which John carefully put his pet on the floor. Following that, he got up from his seat and walked towards Sharon, but stopped because Zero suddenly got up from the couch. "I am your servant, Mr. Wick," Zero declared with strong conviction and firmness, without taking his eyes off John, who ignored the ninja assassin's words and focused on his pet. Translation: "We are both architects of death." "Sit," John ordered in a soft tone, and as if she understood his word, the puppy obeyed her owner's order. "Stay," the brown-haired boy ordered again, watching as the canine obeyed him without complaint. "Good girl," John praised, proceeding to follow Sharon, not wanting to waste his time. On the other hand, Zero sat down, placing one leg over the other. In another scene change, John was alone in an elevator which, upon reaching its destination, opened automatically. At that, the brown-haired man set off, observing how almost everything around him was made of glass, while LED lights in the shape of a tube hung on steel beams. In addition, wherever he went there were display cases containing crystal skulls, and others had plants inside. John continued on his way until he reached a staircase with glass bands at the ends, and as there was no other way, he began to climb step by step until he reached the second upper floor, being able to see Winston, the supernatural beings, and those who were once his parents, thanks to the absence of walls that stood in the way, except for some display cases that had samurai armor. The leaders and their companions just remained silent, unable to even look at John, especially Izumi, who was clenching her fists tightly. The only one who was indifferent to what was happening was Goro. As for the Continental manager, he was focused on the chessboard in front of his eyes, although he was more than aware that John was approaching. "Be careful, Jonathan," Winston warned, being heard by the aforementioned, who extended his right arm, finding a glass that he pushed in order to enter the room. "We only use this room on special occasions, when we have to see if the opponent has something under the table," Winston commented eloquently. In turn, John just positioned himself in the center of the room under the watchful eye of everyone present. "How was your trip?" "Interesting," Winston asked with false curiosity, looking at John. After all, he witnessed the fights his protege had. "Yes," John answered without much enthusiasm, leaving the manager silent. "Of course, they sent men to kill you, and now they sent you to kill me. Isn't that why you're here?" Winston said with such calmness that it seemed like indifference, as if he didn't care about losing his life. "I have served and I will always be of service," John declared firmly without taking his eyes off Winston, alerting those present a little since they did not know if John was really going to kill him. "But you're hesitating. Just don't make the mistake of pretending this is personal. If you think it's necessary." Winston stopped speaking for a second to hold a Colt Model 1903, "Shoot me in the heart," the manager requested with a tone that denoted false distress. After that, he began to walk slowly until he was on the other side of the table with the gun in hand. "The Supreme Order has asked me to resign," Winston warned, to John's slight surprise, who had an idea of why that happened. "The time?" the brown-haired boy questioned a bit curiously, watching as Winston nodded. "Time," the manager answered nonchalantly, looking away at the Colt he was holding. "You should have killed me on the Continental. Or never saved me in the first place," John said seriously as Winston nodded again. "Yes. I could have done it," Winston declared sincerely, taking a couple of steps forward, as did John. "Rules and consequences," John said without abandoning his serious tone, to which Winston only made a face full of indifference. "Well, now we're all suffering the consequences of our actions," Winston commented, watching John, and although they weren't involved in the conversation, the manager's words also reached the supernatural beings. "And you don't plan on giving up," John said, knowing his protector perfectly, as he took a few steps forward. "No. I'm not going to do it," Winston declared with great confidence in his words, walking while looking around. "Are you planning to go to war against the Order?" John questioned with some severity at the manager's attitude. "A brawl. Unless you decide to kill me, because I prefer to die at the hands of a friend than an enemy," Winston said disdainfully, extending the gun in John's direction. "I have made my decision. Now you must choose yours," the manager said calmly, confusing not only John, but also the spectators present. "What decision?" John questioned strangely, looking at Winston in search of a concise answer. "If you kill me, you sell your soul," Winston declared seriously, knowing that John would have no way to disassociate himself from the Supreme Order. "But I will be alive and I will find a purpose for being alive," John replied, willing to fulfill his objective. "Until then you will be and die as a servant of the Supreme Order," Winston objected without taking his eyes off John, who looked away towards the ground. "How do you want to die, Jonathan? As the Baba Yaga? The last thing men see? Or, as a man who fought for his principles?" Winston asked as he approached John, until he was face to face with the aforementioned. "What do you choose, Jonathan?" the manager asked, handing the gun to the brown-haired man. John held the Colt in his right hand, staring at the gun as he remembered the lives he had taken. But shifting his focus, he looked at his left hand, especially at his missing finger, aware that even though he was no longer the same person as before, he still held certain values from that time today. Looking up, the brunette looked at Winston as if he had made a decision, something that the manager and the supernatural beings noticed, thanks to a strong gleam of determination in the killer's eyes. But just as Riaz was about to say something, everyone was able to hear footsteps in the distance. Winston and the supernatural beings, looking forward, saw that it was the adjudicator coming down the stairs. The opposite happened to John, who, having his back turned, had to turn around and witness how the order's emissary, after going down the stairs, walked in his direction. "Mr. Wick. It's a pleasure to meet you, I'm an adjudicator," the emissary of the table expressed with slight cordiality, observing the brown-haired man, and then turning her gaze towards Winston. "Have you decided to leave your position?" The adjudicator questioned in a stern tone, to which John turned to look at his protector. "Of course not," Winston answered firmly in his words without taking his gaze off the adjudicator, who fixed her eyes on John. "And you, are you planning to shoot him in the temple?" the adjudicator questioned, being stared at by the brown-haired man. "No. I won't," John responded with a tone that denoted confidence, returning the Colt to Winston as a sign of alliance, which the aforementioned accepted by grabbing the weapon. "Okay," the adjudicator said, not looking very happy, turning around and taking a few steps forward. Once that was done, the Supreme Order's emissary took out a cell phone and began to dial a number. When she finished, she placed the phone to her right ear, waiting for someone to answer. Meanwhile, curious and confused, the supernatural beings approached where Winston and John were. "What are you doing?" Michael asked, somewhat bewildered as he watched the adjudicator. "Something not good," Winston answered with a certain pessimism without taking his eyes off the adjudicator. "I would like to change an appointment," the order's emissary requested, being heard by everyone, Winston being the only one who realized what was about to happen. "Award 1,011,979, Continental Hotel, Tokyo," the adjudicator announced, and then heard new designation deconsecrated. The emissary declared seriously, being put on hold by the person on the other end of the call. For his part, John looked at Winston when he noticed what the adjudicator was doing, but knowing that he couldn't do anything to change it, he just stayed where he was. After a few seconds, everyone saw how the adjudicator closed the cover of her phone and put it in her pants pocket, then turned around and walked towards them. "Ladies and gentlemen, this constitution has been deconsecrated, so the transactions may be made on the hotel grounds," the adjudicator informed before fixing her eyes on Winston. "Since you refuse to resign," the adjudicator stopped speaking to turn her gaze towards John, "and you refuse to obey a direct order, your lives will be eliminated. Emissaries of the Supreme Order will present themselves to remove your souls from the property," the adjudicator declared seriously, to the concern of those who were once Issei's partners. "As for you," the order's emissary stopped to look at the supernatural beings, "I suggest you leave this place. Members of the Supreme Order will apologize in person for this event. Have a good night, ladies and gentlemen," the adjudicator declared, and then left without saying anything else. "This sanctuary is no longer safe," Winston commented negatively as he watched the order's emissary leave the room. "What are they going to do?" Azazel asked somewhat curiously, looking at Winston, who returned his gaze. "You will leave the hotel. This fight is not yours, and the last thing we need right now is intervention," Winston declared seriously, knowing that if he dealt with supernatural beings, he would not be able to think well about his moves. While Winston was talking to the leaders on one side, on the other they were observed by their companions and a John who remained silent, thinking what to do. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he noticed that someone held his left hand. Seeing the person responsible, the brown-haired boy witnessed how Riaz touched his non-existent ring finger. "You don't have to fight, Ice. Let's go home," Riaz commented in a soft tone, caressing her ex-partner's hand. However, with a sudden movement he freed himself from the Grimory's grip. The aforementioned couldn't help but feel bad at that, and as if it weren't enough, the imaginary Issei she saw was laughing mockingly and maliciously. Lowering her head sadly, Riaz simply remained silent, which was enough for Goro to position himself very close to Izumi, who witnessed what happened with the redeed. "What are you waiting for, Izumi? This is the only chance you'll have to get him back," Goro whispered near his ex-wife's ear, who instead of being scared by his unexpected words, was flooded with memories. Images ran through her mind, each one of her son who radiated a warm and bright aura. And even though he wasn't the perfect son she had hoped for, the steps she was taking made him much better than that fantasy. However, those images changed, and they went on to what happened that day, the day she signed that deal with the leaders of the allied factions. In addition, that together with the conversation she had with Winston, brought her back to reality, accepting the cruel truth that her son no longer existed, he was dead, and she was just another accomplice in his murder. "Jonathan," Izumi called, surprising most of those present with the way she named the brunette, who turned around, staring at the woman who was his mother, opening his eyes as he did so. Fill them all, Izumi commented with a big smile, leaving more than just Goro perplexed, who clenched his hands tightly at the failure of his plan. John, for his part, didn't say anything, instead he walked towards Winston, who watched as his protege slowly approached until he was in front of him, noticing a very intense shine in his eyes. "Winston, do I still have access to the hotel services?" John questioned, being observed by everyone in the room. "Under these circumstances, your privileges are immediately restored. What do you need?" Winston asked curiously, but he was more than aware of the brunette's answer. "Weapons. I need lots of them," John answered with enormous conviction, making not only Winston smile, but Izumi as well. "You can rest in peace, Issei. No one, not even me, will bother you again," Izumi thought with a happy smile on her face, accepting that John, as much as he looked like her son, was not him, was not Issei, and that he was resting peacefully in some mythological paradise. Changing the scene, Winston, Charon, John and their pet arrived at an underground level of the hotel by means of an elevator. The aforementioned did not waste time and began to advance along a long corridor, although the canine followed its owner above all. "It's good to know that the leaders and their companions have left," Charon commented, being aware that no supernatural beings were in the Continental facilities. "Oh, but you can be sure they didn't do it peacefully," Winston said, remembering how most of the women had made a scene, which the leaders should have seen too. "Mr. Winston," the voice of a man behind them made them stop and then turn around. When they did, they realized that it was Tao, who was heading in their direction with a laptop in hand. "Tao, what's wrong?" Winston asked interestedly and then resumed his path like the rest. "Well, all the tenants have already been notified about the deconsecration of the hotel. In addition, all the guards and janitors are going to stay to fight against the emissaries of the order," Tao informed in a cordial tone, making Winston nod, while Charon and John just listened. "Okay. Stay with me in case I need anything," Winston ordered calmly, and without even refuting, Tao nodded with strong determination. After a few seconds, the five of them reached the door of a vault, and to one side of it, there was a panel which Winston touched, after which he placed his hand on it and then withdrew it. Once he had done that, the manager turned the handle of the door and, when it opened, he revealed a large, well-decorated room, but what made it stand out the most was the huge amount of weapons hanging on the walls. "Let's make a retreat," Winston commented, entering the room, while Charon let John, the puppy and Tao pass before him. Winston, for his part, walked over to a small cabinet where there were 2 bottles of whiskey along with several glasses. John, on the other hand, looked at the weapons there and gave the manager a nod of approval, who returned the gesture with a small smile. "Remember, sir. Order forces will be coming, so we must make careful selections," Charon advised in a gentle tone, watching as John grabbed a Combat Master Glock 34 and removed the magazine. "Like which ones?" John asked curiously, putting the magazine in the gun. After that he proceeded to move the slide backwards, getting a bullet to enter the chamber. With that ready he adjusted the slide. "Let me recommend the Combat Master 2011, Charon suggested, grabbing the weapon in combination with the 9mm. The janitor finished speaking, handing the gun to John, who held it with his left hand. "All the tenants have already left," Tao announced while sitting on a single sofa, completely focused on his laptop resting on his legs. "Osaka is going to make a lot of money tonight," Winston said dejectedly at the loss of the hotel, limiting himself to petting John's puppy to boost his spirits. "But John," he removed the magazine from the Combat Master in order to check it and then put it back in its place. After that, he pulled the slide back which, having the bullet in the chamber, moved the slide forward without any complications. After that, John nodded in pleasure at how comfortable he felt with the weapon, but turned his attention to Charon, who had placed a 9mm bullet in front of him. 125 grain, 1425 feet per second. "Really lethal," Charon commented with a strong confidence in his words, and since he trusted him a lot, John accepted the projectile. "Thank you," John expressed sincerely, not being aware of the weapon upgrade, receiving a modest nod from Charon. "Hey, gentlemen. The soldiers of the Supreme Order have arrived," Tao warned, watching through his computer as 2 buses painted completely black and with a sticker that said, "Si vis pacem, parabellum," stopped in front of the hotel. And also, the security guard commented while observing different cameras. In one, 2 men were going up some stairs, in another, 2 were wandering around the kitchen, and finally, 0 was in the lobby. "There are 5 shinobis in the Continental, including the shaved guy called Zero," Tao warned, directing his gaze towards Charon and John, who looked at each other and nodded together. Then proceeded to get down to work. For his part, Winston got up from his seat and began to walk towards a vinyl player, which already had a record in it, so the manager turned the device on, causing the record to start spinning. Following that, he moved the phono arm until it was almost at the edge of the record. Once that was done, the manager could hear Vivaldi's Winter, 4 Seasons starting to play on the speakers in the room. And not only there, but also at the entrance of the hotel, several soldiers who had just entered the building heard the song, yet, raising their weapons with flashlights in them, they continued on their way. Meanwhile, John finished reloading the combat master and placed it on the right side of his waist. Following that, he placed magazine after magazine in the back area of the tactical belt he was wearing. In the hotel lobby, several stun and blind bombs were thrown into the center where everything was empty. Seconds later, one by one they detonated, causing such a roar that even from her room, the adjudicator was able to hear it. However, the emissary only limited herself to sit calmly and patiently watch the bonfire in front of her. "Sharon, why don't you set the mood for our guests?" Winston asked, watching as Sharon finished placing 2 magazines on his left hip. "Of course," Sharon replied kindly, heading towards a wall on which there were 2 small handles. The janitor simply grabbed the handles and pulled them back, revealing an electrical panel from which he pulled a lever downwards. In the hallway, the order soldiers witnessed how the lights went out completely, causing them to stop. However, the emergency lights were activated, leaving everyone bewildered. "I know you'll make the Continental proud," Winston said thoughtfully, watching as his most loyal friend gave him a smile. "I'll see you soon," Sir Charon commented without abandoning his cordial tone and giving a slight bow, being more than willing to give his life, while John positioned himself in front of Winston holding a SIG MCX with a double magazine. "Gentlemen," Winston commented looking at both John and Charon. "Happy hunting," the manager said seriously, raising his glass of whiskey. Without saying a word, John turned around and headed for the door, but before he could leave, John knocked the clips on his gun apart. After John continued on his way, Charon left, but not before closing the door under the gaze of Winston and Tao. "See this passum?" Winston stopped speaking as he watched a door handle turn parabellum, the manager finished declaring as he looked at the tightly sealed door. With John, he was quietly exiting an elevator towards the main hall of the hotel. Meanwhile, Charon entered the hall through a door, inspecting his surroundings while pointing an HKP-30L, then nodding, as several guards proceeded to leave, heading to different places separately. After leaving the lobby, John walked through a double door and hurriedly headed toward the vault, proceeding to knock on the entrance more than once. "Winston, Winston," John shouted excitedly, waiting for the manager to open the door for him. On the other side, Winston, hearing his protege, grabbed a remote control that was at his side, followed by pressing a button that opened the entrance. But impatient, John took it upon himself to open the door completely in order to enter with his fully unloaded pistol in his right hand. "I needed more weapons," John declared hurriedly, watching as Winston spread his arms in a sign for him to grab whatever weapons he wanted. After all, there was a huge amount. Before John could do anything, Charon walked past the brunette as he took off his jacket, then left it on a chair and walked over to a wall where several shotguns were hanging. Without even hesitating, the janitor chose a Benelli M4 Super 90, and following his example, John went to the same wall to grab a Benelli M2 Super 90. With gun in hand, John joined Charon, who took 2 cartridge holders out of a drawer, which he handed to the brunette in order to grab a handful more ammunition, leaving them on a table nearby. "Any improvement?" John asked curiously, staring at Charon, who held a cartridge. "Full force, armor-piercing shells," Charon answered with complete confidence in his words, to which he and John did not waste any more time and proceeded to reload their shotguns. Meanwhile, Winston watched his friend and protege do what he was doing, taking a sip of his drink in the process. After Charon put on his jacket and John placed the cartridge belts on the back of his waist, they both turned to Winston to give him a nod, watching as the manager raised his glass in response. But that done, John and Charon left the room, whereupon Winston pressed a button on the remote control, causing the door to close. Outside, Charon made sure the entrance was properly locked. With that done, the janitor took the safety off the shotgun, followed by John sliding the ejector back, and it snapped back into place before the two of them began to advance together. After that last shot, John moved away from the body to proceed to leave the surface, but as he did so, the assassin was surprised to find himself facing an order soldier who was pointing the flashlight hanging from his gun at him. However, the soldier lowered his gun and fell to the ground to the side, lifeless, revealing Zero, who was responsible for his death. "Only for my sword," John Zero declared with strong conviction in his tone, demonstrating his sword with blood. Translation: "No one but me will kill you." Throwing away his gun, John quickly sank into the water, which alerted Zero, who didn't hesitate to leave. But before he could leave the place, John came to the surface with a Glock 19 in hand, which he fired in Zero's direction, missing the shot as the ninja assassin walked away. At that, John didn't waste any time and emerged from the pool completely soaked. In a scene change, John was exiting an elevator, having returned to the administrative room. Before continuing forward, he stopped to quickly inspect the area, followed by a walk, while pointing his gun with one hand and removing his tactical belt with the other, which he let fall to the floor once unbuckled. After doing that, John removed the magazine from the Glock to check how many bullets it contained. When he noticed that he had a decent amount, he quickly put it back and continued on his way. However, almost halfway there, one of Zero's students came out from between some glass cases, hitting the brunette in the hands, causing him to drop the gun. After that, the boy came out of nowhere, hit John in the chest, followed by another blow to the face, causing the brunette to turn around, then kick him in the back, sending him crashing into a glass window. Looking at the dead man on the ground, John looked up as he felt someone watching him. It was Zero, who was applauding him from the second floor, then giving him a happy smile and 2 thumbs up. Without further ado, John continued on his way, and as he climbed the stairs, he managed to spot 2 of Zero's students waiting for him on the second floor. Upon arriving, the brunette continued on his way, ignoring the man who was a few meters behind him. Although halfway there, Shinobi 2 let out a scream while attacking John with a karambit knife. But using the sword he had, John defended himself from the attack, causing a sound to be generated due to the clash of both metals. Shinobi 2 attacked John again with his knife, who using his forearm blocked and deflected the cut. After that, he tried to return it to the ninja, although the aforementioned crouched, and before that, John threw his body back, evading a cut that was going for his stomach. John threw 2 more slashes, which Shinobi 2 dodged. However, the brown-haired man, seeing that the missing ninja assassin was very close to him, quickly tried to slash him. But the man kicked John in the stomach, causing him to throw his arm and sword back. Taking the opportunity, that same man delivered a roundhouse kick to John's face, causing the aforementioned to take a few steps back as Shinobi 1 landed carefully on the ground. Meanwhile, Shinobi 2 slid across the glass floor towards John, knocking him down with his leg in the process, and when the brunette fell, Shinobi 1 crawled across the floor trying to land a kick on John. Although the aforementioned retreated, spinning on the ground, evading the attack, then crouched down and, as he had Shinobi 1 in front of him, he tried to cut him. However, the ninja assassin kicked him in the wrist, preventing him from doing so, followed by another kick to the solar plexus, causing John to get up. Standing up, John tried to cut Shinobi 1 again, but with his feet crossed, he caught the brunette's hand and held on tightly to it, preventing the brunette from being able to withdraw his limb. And as if that wasn't enough, Shinobi 2, who had already gotten up from the ground, quickly delivered a spinning kick to John right in the face, so taking advantage of the opportunity, Shinobi 1 knocked down the brunette and then took the sword from his hand. After that, Shinobi 1 rolled over to get to John's left side, while Shinobi 2 let out a scream as he jumped, positioning himself on the brown-haired boy's right side. In this way, and while crouching, Zero's 2 students put their weapons close to John's face, who only limited himself to keeping his hands open, carefully observing both shinobis seriously. But removing the wakizashi from John's face and placing it behind his left leg, Shinobi 1, who was in that same direction next to John, extended his hand in greeting, confusing the latter greatly. "We'll see you soon, Mr. Wick," Shinobi 1 greeted in a friendly manner, placing the hand he extended on his chest as a sign of respect. Translation: "Nice to meet you. We'll be happy to hear it, Mr. Wick," Shinobi 2 declared respectfully, removing the dagger from the brunette's face, positioning the hand holding the weapon on his chest. Translation: "It will be an honor to fight with you." Standing up, both shinobis motioned with their hands for John to get up and even extended their hands to help him. At that, the brown-haired boy was a bit surprised, but he still accepted the help, standing up thanks to both ninjas. Standing up, John witnessed how Shinobi 1 left his sword on the table and proceeded to unbutton his jacket, as did Shinobi 2, with the difference that Shinobi 1 pulled out a karambit knife from his coat. On the other hand, John took a few steps back, and when he turned to see both ninjas, witnessing how they bent their knees and stood on guard, he decided to follow their example. After a short wait, the first to attack was Shinobi 1 with a kick that hit John's arm, which did not have much effect, although the kick he would later receive from Shinobi 2 caused him to retreat a few steps. But without letting his guard down, John watched as both ninjas raised their daggers, so using his forearms he was able to block the attacks. But applying more force, the 2 shinobis made John give in and take a few steps back, which Shinobi 1 also did, who let his partner give the brown-haired boy a roundhouse kick in the stomach. And as that made John retreat even further, Shinobi 1 took advantage to do an upward slash to John, causing him to throw his head back, evading the attack, but he was unable to block another kick that went towards his belly. Feeling a sharp pain in his abdomen, John watched both shinobis waiting for one of the 2 to make a move, although he didn't expect the 2 of them to jump together and kick him in the chest, which sent him crashing into a display case and then falling hard to the ground along with several pieces of glass, having covered his face with his arm to avoid serious problems. Idu Semikin Lambit Shinobi 1 expressed somewhat disappointed as he watched a figure he admired so much lie on the ground. Translation: "It's getting slow. Let's kiss, you and I will be together again," Shinobi 2 said seriously without taking his gaze off John, who was unable to get up. Translation: "Most likely your body must be reaching its limit. "What are you doing here?" John Wick Shinobi 1 declared with a smile that showed pure emotion, waiting for John to stand up and show what he is capable of, even in terrible conditions. Translation. "That's what makes him, John Wick. We're still together," Shinobi 2 commented with few expectations as he witnessed how the brown-haired boy had just gotten on his knees. Translation. "We'll see." Seeing that, the shinobi extended their hands to assist John, who only raised his hands in rejection, and that he could do it alone. Getting the message, Shinobi 1 nodded with some mockery while lowering his hand, as did his partner. Standing up, John walked through the middle of both shinobi, who stepped aside to let him pass, but as the brunette walked away he took off his belt. With the belt in his hand and at a considerable distance, John turned around to face both ninjas, who got into position to fight just like the brunette. With difficulty, John slowly got up until he saw the wakizashi near him, so he reached out to grab its back, alerting Shinobi 1, who was unable to move even though he clung to his knife. With his sword in hand, John stood up straight and turned around to see the assassin ninjas, who remained on the ground in pain, but still, their determination to fight was evident. "Sampai jumpa," John said respectfully, resting his right hand on his chest. Both shinobi looked at each other in surprise, but at the words of their idol, they decided to lie down on the ground to rest. Translation. "I'll see you later." After that, John raised his head, fixing his eyes on Zero, who was on the second floor. Without wasting any more time, the brunette proceeded to walk with the aim of returning to the top floor. Already on the second floor, John could see Zero in the distance, who leaned on the table and held a remote control, with which he turned off most of the lights, leaving the emergency ones on. "John, you are amazing," Zero declared with amazement in his tone, witnessing how the assassin headed towards his direction slowly but firmly. "Exhausted, outnumbered, obviously in pain. And yet, you defeated all of my students," Zero said with fascination, watching John, who was getting closer and closer, expelling an aura full of killing intent. "If I didn't have to kill you, we would be friends," Zero expressed with some sadness in his voice, but he was more than determined to complete his task. "Let's finish," John declared seriously, changing his grip on the sword halfway, then quickening his pace until he was in front of Zero and tried to slash him, but the ninja assassin dodged it. In the vault. The sound of an old telephone rang in the room. Tao just kept silent, watching as Winston leaned forward with his hands clasped together as if he was waiting for something. Just as Tao was about to deign to say something, the vault door opened, alerting the security guard, but he calmed down when he realized it was a tired Charon, wet with sweat and with the Benelli in his hand. "Mr. Charon," Tao commented with a happy smile upon seeing the concierge safe and sound, completely ignoring the noise coming from the phone. But when he least expected it, Tao stopped hearing that annoying sound and, surprised, he turned to see Winston, who positioned the speaker of the device near his right ear under the gaze of Charon and a Tao who looked very anxious. "I want to suggest a pact," the adjudicator spoke on the other end of the call, drawing a small smile from the manager. "I find that interesting," Winston commented without erasing his smile, trying to sound as indifferent as possible. "Very well," the adjudicator stated calmly, to which Winston proceeded to cut the call. Following that, he grabbed the Colt that was on the table. "Are we back, sir?" Charon asked curiously, causing his boss to get up from his seat and place the gun on the back of his waist. Meanwhile, Tao did not hesitate and stood up. "Of course I do," Winston answered confidently in his words as he adjusted his jacket. After that, the manager began to move forward with Tao following him from behind. In the administrative room. Returning to Zero and John, the latter was sitting on the ground while the ninja assassin lay on the ground with the wakizashi stuck in his chest. Even so, Zero slowly sat down in agony from the sheer pain until he was at the height of John, who kept his gaze fixed on the ground. "Hey, John," Zero called with difficulty, trying to minimize the pain with his breathing. "That was a very good fight, wasn't it?" The ninja assassin asked with a lot of pain, but that didn't hide the curiosity he felt being looked at by John. "Yes," John expressed honestly, to which Zero turned to look him in the eyes, making the brunette uncomfortable as he returned his gaze to the ground. Out of nowhere, the lights in the entire room went out simultaneously, although after a few seconds, the light came back, surprising John, who proceeded to get up with some ease, proceeding to head towards his belt that was on the floor. "Yes, don't worry about me, John, I'll catch my breath," Zero said with great difficulty, watching as the aforementioned man grabbed his belt, then made his way out of the room, having passed by him as if nothing had happened. "And then I'll find you," Zero expressed with tenacity in his voice, causing John to stop and turn to look at the ninja. "No. You won't," John stated with certainty in his words, being aware that Zero was going to die and there was almost nothing that could prevent it. Leaving the place without saying anything, when he was meters away from reaching the stairs, John heard a sound in the distance. Turning to see what it was, the brunette saw that Zero was now collapsed on the ground dead, while a pool of blood was forming beneath him. Change of scene. On the rooftop of the Continental, Charon, Tao, and Winston stood near a lit fireplace behind them. On the other side, sitting comfortably on a single sofa, was the adjudicator. "Gentlemen, you'll realize that was only the first wave. In a nutshell, it was breakfast," the adjudicator stated calmly, receiving a nonchalant grin from Winston, while the janitor and security guard were merely spectators. "We can continue as long as you want, but it only ends one way," the order's emissary declared menacingly, staring at Winston. "Do you think a prolonged war is the best option?" Winston asked somewhat haughtily, deeply annoying the adjudicator with his attitude. "It won't be prolonged at all," the adjudicator replied seriously, receiving a carefree nod from the manager. "Or they can take the Continental, no doubt about it. But keeping it, that's a very different story. My alliances go beyond this building," Winston expressed with confidence and security in his voice. After all, 5 decades of work had borne too many fruits. "It's about the Supreme Order," the adjudicator claimed seriously, looking Winston straight in the eyes, who took a step forward. "And we are Tokyo," Winston declared somewhat threateningly, not intimidated by the order's emissary, who recognized the manager's temperance. "Shall we make a deal?" the adjudicator asked seriously, looking at Winston, who turned his gaze towards the entrance of the terrace due to the entry of an individual. "I suppose so," Winston replied condescendingly without taking his eyes off the person who entered, to which the adjudicator turned her head to see who it was, being John Wick. "Do they have a pact?" John questioned, somewhat bewildered, from a distance, proceeding to advance towards where Winston was. "Right, Jonathan. Are you with me?" Winston returned the question as the brunette slowly approached. "Always," John declared with a tone that denoted firmness, once he was at a considerably close distance from everyone present. "What do you propose we do?" the adjudicator asked interestedly, looking at Winston, being aware that he was the boss. "Jonathan and I want to keep our power," Winston answered calmly, while Charon and Tao knew that having done their duty, they were not going to be punished by the Supreme Order. "Under the order?" the emissary questioned sternly, undecided whether to accept the pact or not after the great disorder and problems caused by both John and Winston. "We have served, as well as being a beacon of order and stability in this industry. We humbly acknowledge that we overstepped our bounds and reiterate our loyalty to the Supreme Order," Winston declared in a condescending manner, bowing slightly as he finished, and within seconds, the adjudicator opened her eyes as if she had discovered something. "He simply showed strength so that we would let him keep the Continental," the adjudicator commented, impressed at having recently realized that, bringing a small smile to Winston's face. However, the adjudicator spoke, causing Winston's smile to disappear, and instead, the manager watched as the emissary rose from her seat and focused her eyes on John. "What about you, Mr. Wick? How do you plan to prove your loyalty? Even though you did not fulfill the regent's task," the adjudicator questioned sternly, leaving the brown-haired man speechless, who only limited himself to kneeling. John stopped speaking when he noticed a great murderous instinct coming from the door that connected to the terrace. John turned his gaze towards the door, and due to his action, everyone did the same and witnessed how the entrance was opened loudly by a woman, this one, Samantha D'Antonio. It was not necessary to mention that those involved were surprised by the appearance of Lady D'Antonio, especially Tao, who despite being in charge of surveillance, at no time saw her on the security cameras. However, Tao stopped focusing on that when he realized that the woman was holding a Kimmer 1911 in her hand, which she pointed in John's direction, who, upon seeing that, quickly used his jacket as protection. Without saying anything, the widow began shooting John left and right, running out of bullets in a matter of seconds, and without even having done anything to her husband's killer. As for the aforementioned, when he noticed that Samantha no longer had any more ammunition in the chamber, he was about to draw his pistol. However, he did not have one, so he would have to go towards her without lowering his suit. "Jonathan," Winston called out in a calm voice to his protege, gaining the attention of the aforementioned, who had stopped his plan to see what Winston had prepared. As she did so, John watched as Winston threw the Colt at her in full view of everyone present, including Samantha, who rushed to remove the magazine from the gun. However, John did not hesitate and got rid of his guard to be able to grab the pistol, and just as Lady D'Antonio finished loading her weapon, John shot her in the left hand, severing her last 2 fingers and causing her to drop the Kimmer. "Damn bastard," Samantha growled in complete anger with blood coming out of her fingers, watching as John kept the gun raised. "Come on, kill me just like my husband," Samantha requested with a loud voice. If she couldn't kill the man who murdered her husband, then she would meet him again in hell. Despite the consequences of leaving her alive, John lowered his gun, making Samantha even angrier. However, "Eliminator," the adjudicator ordered sternly, looking at John, who returned his gaze to the emissary. "Eliminator, and you will regain your position, plus the open contract will be withdrawn," the adjudicator declared with honesty in her tone, and although in part he didn't want to, John still raised the Colt and set his sights on Samantha and pulled the trigger with some hesitation. The sound of the shot resounded loudly, and unlike it, Samantha's body made a soft sound when it hit the ground. without the need to examine the body, thanks to the bullet hole in her forehead and the blood that was flowing from there, the adjudicator confirmed the death of Samantha D'Antonio. The Supreme Order accepts the loyalty of both. But there will be no second chances. If you make another mistake you will be eliminated, the adjudicator stated sternly, observing both John and Winston, although if she were honest with herself, both were equally problematic. Understood, Winston commented confidently, but for his part, John said nothing, focused on Samantha's corpse. Very well, gentlemen. The Continental will be reconsecrated and you, Mr. Wick, will now be able to walk freely through the streets, the adjudicator commented, holding her briefcase as she proceeded to leave, until she stopped almost immediately after doing so. Have a nice day, she commented before leaving the hotel once and for all, stepping over Samantha's body. Once the presence of the Order's emissary vanished, Tao let out a long sigh of relief, as did Sharon, but she was calmer. Meanwhile, Winston approached John until he was standing next to the aforementioned who could not stop looking at Samantha. Winston, everyone who came for me did it for the reward, right? John questioned without looking at his protector, who only limited himself to placing his hand on the brunette's shoulder. It's all over now, Jonathan. You don't have to think about it, Winston answered calmly, proceeding to take the gun from John's hand, who didn't resist. Go rest, you deserve it, Winston advised, shaking John's head so he could witness the sunrise, causing him to regain consciousness. A new tomorrow is coming, Winston finished speaking, seeing how John nodded in confirmation, and without further ado, the four of them proceeded to leave the roof. Nevertheless. In the sky, various magical creatures were flying to the far reaches of the Continental. No one, not even John himself, was aware of their fight. The underworld, heaven, Grigori, Asgard, and the Yokai realm. The races belonging to their respective mythologies watched a hotel in disbelief through different devices that had a screen. It was broadcast to all the allied factions, which Milikas, who was now a very handsome young adult, stood with his mouth slightly agape, unable to utter a single word, the same thing that happened to those who were once children and idolized the former Red Emperor. Few were those who celebrated that their hero was alive, after all, they never believed the lie of his betrayal. In a kind of den, a huge number of people celebrated what they had witnessed, so much so that they shouted with such happiness to the four heavens without caring about anything. But as for the rest. In no house, in no town, in no capital, nowhere did anyone dare to say anything because of the shock. Just responding with silence. Some time later. In a completely dark room, where you could see almost nothing, there were 5 screens on which you could only see different letters. So that's how it all turned out, huh? Man's voice through a screen that had the letter B on it, commented in an interested manner, that old Winston is really crazy, B expressed with a certain enthusiasm, as if he wanted to meet the manager in person. It was to be expected. He has the loyalty of everyone at the Continental, plus he has John Wick as an ally, the indifferent tone of a woman commented through the monitor that said A. Oh, yeah, that guy is amazing too. I never thought I'd get to meet the Regent, B said with fascination in his tone of voice. The good thing about all this is that at least John's death was avenged, A commented in a tone that denoted pleasure. Murders of members of the Supreme Order will not be tolerated, even if the murderer is a permanent member of the Supreme Order. Article 62, paragraph 15 of the Supreme Order's Constitution, a man's serious voice said through the screen that had the letter Y as its name. Very well, now that this matter has been resolved. It is time to change the subject, declared an authoritative man through the monitor that said T. Each one will begin to strictly manage the most lethal assassins and therefore, the most loyal ones they have. We must overthrow the supernatural beings once and for all, T stated seriously without receiving any comments, until. What about John Wick? B asked curiously, and although he had hitmen with the requested characteristics, he had to admit that the aforementioned possessed great qualities. John Wick will be blacklisted for the time being, as will Winston. Until we verify the loyalty of both of them towards us, they will not be informed of anything, and those with whom they have contact, make sure they keep their mouths shut, T ordered sternly. Understood, the other members declared so that everyone could turn off their respective monitors. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.